Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 101st live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, we have a really fun topic for you. We are going to be looking at kind of a little bit of a history of episode, but we are going to be looking at the loss of power and how that has represented through all of the editions of D&D and what it means for each in the individual classes. So we're going to look primarily at first at spellcasters and how through each of the editions they've been able to lose their spells and their ability to cast spells. Then we're also going to be taking a look at paladins and how throughout the editions they've been able to lose their divine abilities. And then we'll be taking a peek at some of the other classes throughout the editions that have had various ways that they've been able to lose their abilities. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this one. Join us on this discussion today. Let us know how you guys feel about it in the chat and bring up your opinions and ask some questions. But yeah, we also have Kage here with us today. He is going to be remote. So let's go ahead and bring him in and then we can start to get started here. I love that. That is a great intro. What's up, dude? How you doing?
What's going on, brethren? You know, we out here chilling. Shalom, my friends. Very excited to be here again. Remote, obviously, but you know, we do what we can. We do what we can, right?
It's happening, man. We do as much as we can. Did we hit affiliate? Question coming in from the Freeman. So we are ever so close. We did hit the follower goal, so we do finally have 50 followers. We hit that on our 100th episode, which was really cool to see. So thank you guys so much for that.
Fire.
But due to me being I don't really want to say impatient. I ended up doing a stream on Sunday, and I didn't get a lot of viewership through that particular time that afternoon that I was streaming. So it did dip our average concurrent viewer per stream. So while we were like at 3.2, which is what we needed to be, my Sunday stream dropped it below like 2.9 or 2.8. I posted it in the Discord if you guys want to take a look. But yeah, we were ever so close. Didn't quite make it due to the time frame. So hopefully today is going to be a great stream. Hopefully it's going to be entertaining. You guys have a lot of fun. Stick around. And if we can get the 3 concurrent stream back up today, then we will also be able to do it. Goldfish Go, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome and welcome and welcome. We do appreciate we do appreciate that. Thank you so much. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. You guys, if you guys have been here for a few seconds, you guys saw that in the chat. I did post the link to the Discord. So if you want to join the community to be able to kind of give us some ideas and join the chat after stream, you guys can do that as well. And the link to our YouTube channel as well if you guys want to catch any of our previous live streams. But indeed. Otherwise, yes. So I'm really curious, Kage, how much you know or how much you've figured out about the loss of power, both with spellcasters, paladins, and any other classes that you can think of. I'm just curious, what's your baseline understanding of what loss of power is?
So I have my own perspective on what I think that looks like, my own idea of like kind of the logic path that would go down. But as far as actual history of how the editions have treated it, I have never actually, I've never actually figured out what the editions actually say that it is. So it's very interesting. It's a new concept for me, but I'm very interested to see what the actual Discord has. To see what the actual Discord, or not the Discord, but what the actual editions have said about that. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, absolutely. One second here.
No worries. But it is. A lot of these subjects that we go through, a lot of these topics that we talk about, because it's weird for me. Like, there are a lot of people who've been playing D&D for like years and years and years, but I've only been at it for so long, and I still feel very green and new, and there's still so much that I don't know about, like, you know, core D&D, and so much, like, I'm like, that's why I love doing these streams, because I learn so much about how things used to be, how things actually go and whatnot. So I don't know, I'm very excited for it. I'm very excited to see how it ends up.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really interested because this is one of those things where I'm not really sure how much I know officially and how much I've been influenced by outside perspectives and other people, and like my previous games, my DM, and all of that sort of thing. So it was really kind of a cool thing to dive into this and really look at it, because I think I was even surprised to find how many different classes actually had official cutoff points, like official things that could be done for that. So absolutely. But also there was a comment in chat for you, Kage. I had to take care of it real quick, but if you want to look on your mod side, you can take a look at it.
No doubt.
It was a private message for you. So sorry for Goldfish.
No worries.
I do apologize. It's just more of a privacy issue. I hope you didn't take that personally. Kage was talking, and I didn't want to like.
So much for being here.
Yeah, so please, thank you for being here. I hope you didn't take that the wrong way. I just didn't want to interrupt Kage when he was speaking. But yeah, it's just anonymity, privacy thing for being online and all of that. So I hope you understand. Freeman, hopefully you have a great rest of your weekend. And Cosmic, welcome. Wondering what kind of channel point redeems. Yes, I have quite a few ideas for this. Hopefully in the next week or two, I will be rolling that out. Once we hit affiliate officially, we are looking for that 3 concurrent viewers, which we should hit today. But I don't know how long we will take to get access to the affiliate aspects and things. We did get access to VIPs, which was nice. So I announced that in the Discord as well, where we had we got some VIPs in that. So basically, I kind of posted this. It's very minimal. It quite literally is like the least I can do. But essentially, we are allowed to assign VIPs to the stream. We get a limited number of them. But essentially what they can do is, as a VIP, not only do they get a little moniker. So if you actually look in chat and see Cosmic, he has a new little image next to his name that indicates he's a VIP.
Oh, yes.
Very
cool.
Essentially what that's going to do is it gives them 3 things. They can chat without being affected by the slow mode, sub-only mode, or follower mode. So essentially, if for whatever reason we need to slow things up, or we're shortening chat down, anybody who's a VIP can bypass that. So it's kind of like a trusted level. If something's happening in chat where we got to cut down what people are saying, it's like basically saying, hey, we trust you to still talk. So there's that. They can chat without being affected by rate limits. So if we cut it down to someone can only post every 30 seconds or 10 seconds, so they can't spam, it doesn't matter to them. They can just post as much without any barrier, because again, we trust them. And then they can also post links in chat since we always disable them, but now VIPs can post. So it's kind of that upgraded level of
sharing is caring. I love it.
Let's see. I think emote, I do not think it's for emote only mode. I think it's only for slow, sub, and follower only mode. So essentially, even though you guys aren't like subs, so even though if you may not pay later down the road when we have affiliate and you can pay for subs, you guys act as subs. So it's kind of like a selected thing. But emote only, I still think you're affected by that, because I think that's a mod issue, or I think that's like a mod overwrite. But good question. So yeah, so it's not a whole lot. It's really just the image and then those 3 things that they can do in stream while we're live. But I just, I wanted to at least appreciate those that have either been here the longest, have provided us a lot of feedback, have provided us, inspiration and content, and who've just been, really, really supportive of us. So hopefully that was, again, least we can do for right now, but we're getting there. More stuff to be had. Yes, we will be having a whole mess of stuff. I'm really nailing down right now what emote stuff I want to do, because a lot of it is also just going to be being able to get it right, getting artists to be able to get what I want. So I'm trying to not have a million ideas. I'm trying to narrow it down to what are the foundational things I want to start with, right? What are the things? I don't just want to throw out any emote. I want to be like, okay, if this is going to be the first emote, what's going to be the one I want to be like around the longest, which is the one I'm going to want to look back on and go, I remember that as like the first emote, right? So it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want it to be the right one. I just want it to be not just any one that we throw out there. I kind of want to start strong. So that's why I'm not just like jumping on board with any artist, but I have 2 artists out there. I have done some research. I have found 2 artists that I really, really like, that stand out to me, that don't just look like any other Twitch emotes out there. So fingers crossed that they're going to have some freedom this summer, and yeah, in the next month or 2, hopefully will be popping up. All right, so Other than that, yeah, videos are still coming, guys. I'm still practicing. This week has been super crazy. This whole weekend has been absolutely insane. Just with holidays, family. I got stuff in the Misfit Tavern that I've been doing. I got the texture done on one of the walls. We're doing a whole. One of the walls is supposed to be like a cave wall. So I've got all the texture done, and then I'll be doing that for the next couple weeks. So. Yeah, it has been crazy. Kind of scrambled this idea together, but I was able to get enough of it together this week, so we have a nice fun topic. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the biggest updates right now. We're still just trying to wait. I mean, really, a lot of it's just waiting on when we flip over to affiliate. So Cosmic had missed the previous session from last week, so party went to explore. Oh, okay, this was for your D&D session on Tuesday. Very nice.
The fire
this was this was the fire upon fire upon fire. I mean, hey, you know what? Sometimes you gotta let it all burn. That's all I'm saying.
Yes. Yes.
By the way, you know what? Before we begin, we should address something. So, Cosmic, you were slated for Monday's review for Umbral Ember's Descent, your warbow. So, Kage is not going to be here, remote or otherwise. He's not going to be on stream for Monday. So, with that being said, just as the schedule currently is going and how things are, we can still run your review on Monday. It'll just be me, and you can get my standard review on it from my high point, from a high point of view. However, just as kind of before, especially because we have a much longer list now because we had a bunch of new submissions come in.
Yes, we did.
We won't be able.
Guys.
Yeah, we won't be able to do a follow-up on it for Kage to do live on stream. So if I move forward and do it on Monday, at best, you'll have to hope that Kage will be able to get some free time on his own and maybe give you some feedback via Discord. But I don't know what his schedule is going to be like, so we can't confirm anything. We don't want to guarantee that. If you're okay with it, we can push off that review. You can wait one more week, and we're just going to extend all of the reviews 1 week. At which point we'll both be here, and you can get the full review from both points, from both of us. So we wanted to give you that option, just because of how busy my weekend is. I wasn't even sure if Monday was going to be the smartest option anyway to stream. But again, stream is important, so I want to be here for it. I don't want to change up the schedule too much. But because Kage is not going to be here, I didn't want to not give you the heads up that you have the option of pushing it off so you get a much better full stream. And if I do end up streaming on Monday, it will either be something from High Point, like something that I've built, or some other kind of basic topic like that, homebrewing wise. But let me know what you think, Cosmic. Let me know if you want just me to run your item, your Ember's Descent, on Monday, or if you're willing to wait one more week so you can have Kage here in the studio.
I like the original plan.
All right, so having you look at free time. Okay, so I will be here on Monday then to review that item, just me, and then if and when you get some time, I'm sure you'll let him know what you think.
I will do my utmost. You got it.
All right, fantastic. So with that out of the way, we can start. So so loss of power. So the way that I've kind of rolled this out is we're going to first look at the initial concept of loss of power. That I guess the first idea, which would be spellcaster. It's kind of the main forefront of power loss, and so it's going to be probably the easiest because a lot of the editions do it pretty much the same way. But it did kind of lead into a unique history that I wanted to go into. So we'll start with spellcasters and how each edition has handled each of them, and we'll do a little bit of a history on magic in general. So there's a unique history that we're going to loop into this episode, and then we're going to talk about paladins after spellcasters, and then more just specifically, throughout the editions, what paladins have done, or what they've done in terms of paladins losing their abilities and then regaining them. And then we'll finish off with looking at what other classes have had written in terms of like rules as written where they have power losses. So I think there might be a couple ones that no one's surprised about, but there might be one or two that people are not are not really Used to. So yeah, I was
Okay.
there is one that I was surprised at. I'll just say that there was one that I was unaware was an option. But there's another one I think you're going to be surprised at.
Okay, I'm here for it. I'm excited to check it out.
All right, so let's start with a basic look back of the original concept behind loss of magical power. So essentially, when starting out in original Dungeons and Dragons, so there's not even advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is OD&D, right? Before first edition. This is back in like basic and essentially all of the additions or gameplays that the original creators are playing, right? And at that point, all they really had were your wizards and clerics as your spellcasters, and they were all limited to a set number of spells per day. And this is essentially their
Okay.
memorization. This is something that you've probably experienced when we've played in High Point. So the memorization concept, right? You pre-prep your spells. The idea was that clerics would pray for them, and their god would grant them, or their divine aspect would grant them a certain number of spells that they could cast that day, and the ones that they've chosen. And wizards would actually memorize them. You'd have them memorized, and those are the spells
Now,
that you could cast.
remind me, was this a situation where you prepare these type of spells and you can cast them as much as you want, or you only have a certain number, like I can only cast 5 spells today, and those 5 spells can be one of these 4 options?
So originally it was if you could cast 2 level 2s and 5 level 1 spells, you would have to memorize 2 level 2 spells and 5 level 1s. You'd have a number of spells you could cast right from your spell book. But at the beginning of the day, if you had 10 level 1 spells you knew, you would pick which 5 you would be able to cast that day. And you would only be able to
So
cast them once.
if I wanted to cast Magic Missile more than once, I would have to memorize Magic Missile more than once.
Originally, you could not do that. Later editions, and we'll get into that, but originally, no. Originally,
Interesting.
every spell was its own one time. So you could memorize it once, and once you had it memorized, that was it. You could, and then you would just stack other spells. In a later edition, and I do have those notes, so I'm glad you asked that. But in a later edition, yes, they did expand it to where you could memorize the same spell more than once, although that did cause a little bit of controversy within the creators.
Interesting. Okay, okay.
But
I'm
but
looking
yes,
forward to that.
so originally, wizards and clerics prepped their spells ahead of time, one memorized, one prayed, and they were given a set list. And these were the spells, that was it, one of each, and that's what they could cast each of those days. Once they were cast, they were expended and unavailable until they rested and prepared the spells again. So originally it was a rest and then prepare. However, in later editions, the aspect of rest extended, and eventually, as long as you had preparation time, not all spells required you to actually have like short or long rests or any variation. Sometimes you just had to have the required time to re-prep and re-prepare it. So that also changed throughout each of them. Now, this is where it really gets interesting because this is basically the standard that we're going to see throughout most of them until we basically get to like 5th edition. But this was actually something that I hadn't heard in many, many years, and this is the kind of where we're going to trail off here for a second, because this is actually based on an old magic system that, again, I hadn't heard about. I probably haven't heard this word in like eight plus years. But it's all based on the Vancian magic system. And so I also wanted to talk about that today. Yeah, the Vancian magic system. Just a little, it's a little deviation, but it's kind of a history of magic in D&D, which is going to be kind of fun. And real quick, so that was all original, OD&D and basic. Then we get to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, where you get to what we call First Edition. And with that one, you still have the spellcasters as split between the clerics and the wizards. Still the Vancian system, where you have to prepare them in advance, and once cast, they were lost. Clerics basically had this, but again, it was a known list that was granted by their deity, blah, blah, blah. So same rule set, but a different approach to how you to understood it. And then that was basically for original Dungeons and Dragons. It was basically, there was the concept that you had the spells, you prepped them, and then you used them. That was how that one was. In Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, so first and second edition, basically compiling both of these because they didn't really change, was the first time that they really started talking about paladins, because that's when paladins became, you know, I think it was first edition paladins were now considered part of the spellcasting class, but they also had like the clerical side of things. So they also followed the same concept of preparation, but it wasn't until Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that they came up the first time with the ability to lose your spells. And spell loss rules were basically originally coming of two different approaches. First is the interruption. So spellcasters being able to lose concentration or an interrupt spell, or some way that you could stop them physically from doing the spell if you could affect them during the casting time, right? So it wasn't until Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that we got the idea that you should be able to stop a wizard in the middle of their spell. Counterspell as well, Cosmic, yes. I don't think they didn't have Counterspell before Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, so it wasn't really a mechanic that they thought of, but I think Counterspell was in first edition, if not definitely in second edition, but I'm pretty sure it was in first edition as well. But yeah, so this is where we first get the first level of, or the first concept, the first layer, I should say, of losing your ability to cast spells, which is interruption. And then of course you had another thing introduced, and this was things like, you know, from beholders and other creatures, where you had the ability to level drain. Like you could actually lose levels based off of certain creatures and magical effects, and that could actually directly affect how much spells you could have, like what your casting ability was. So if you had a level 5 spell and you had a level drain, you could lose your ability to cast that level 5 spell because you lost those levels.
So that's a player level, not like spell level.
No, exactly. But if you lose a player level and lose access to level 5 spells, and you had one memorized, you would lose it. So again, it was just that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons started toying with the idea that spells could be removed from the player, because originally it wasn't even, I think it was always custom whether or not going to sleep or being knocked out would lose your spells as a wizard. I think in OD&D, roleplay wasn't as fixated on that level, so it wasn't really needed to be a hard, fastened rule of, you know, it requires like concentration or it requires you being awake and everything. I know in second edition, in supplementals, is where they started playing with the idea of if you go to sleep or if you get knocked out, you would lose your memorized spells. So it's like you could have them prepped, but if you get knocked out, you would lose your prep. Whereas if you just took a nap or something, you'd be fine. So I think there's supplementals that discuss that in second edition, but standard-wise, either level drain or some sort of interruption, or like Cosmic said, a counterspell, were pretty much the standards that were set early on for what could disrupt spells. Now, before we continue, because now we're going to continue to third edition. Well, let's see here. So third edition, really, all that did was it still maintained the Vancian system, but it did have more flexibility. This is where sorcerers and bards started to become more prevalent. We saw those in second edition, but they really started to expand in terms of like the spontaneous casting, where you had a limited number of known spells, but you can cast any combination within their spell slot, right? So these were unlike wizards who said, hey, like you said, I've memorized invisibility, so I'm going to have invisibility all day that I can cast. Whereas a sorcerer might know invisibility or, I'm blanking on an equally level spell, or like Speak with Dead. You might have both. Yeah, you might have both, but a sorcerer won't have to pre-choose at the beginning of the day which one they can cast. A sorcerer will be able to cast them as they want, and that was kind of one of the things that sorcerers and bards were able to do. Is I think even druids. Druids also had early on. Druids also had predefined spells, but like a sorcerer didn't have to. You didn't have to be a sorcerer and say, this is the spell I'm going to have all day. You had a list of spells you could do, and you would burn one of your spell slots to cast one of those spells that you knew how to do.
So at what edition were spell slots introduced? So
I believe spell slots officially are a 5th edition.
5th edition,
because
so
3.5 was still the Vancian system, where you memorize spells. But when you expand it to sorcerers, you don't memorize, you just have a set number. So that's closest to having a spell slot. Because the Vancian system is similar to spell slots, right? Like you have 2 level 2 spells you can cast, so you can memorize them, and then once you cast them. So a sorcerer would have...
Spells. They have to be different spells, yeah.
Right, whereas a sorcerer, however, would have 2 level 2 spells. So really you could consider that a spell slot because it wasn't that spell slot wasn't already taken by a predetermined spell. You were just able to cast 2 spells at level 2. Now and then you had a list of spells you could choose from at the time of casting. Because remember, you're a sorcerer. You're not yeah, because you're a sorcerer. You're not you don't have to memorize anything.
Yeah, that's exactly what my question is on, because the way I understand sorcerers is their magic is innate. They don't have spell lists to choose from. They don't have like, hey, you have this many spells that you know, and you can like pick whichever spells you want and be like, hey, I'm going to use this spell today, or you just know.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, and that's what this is. That's what I'm saying. This is the first, what you could consider the first introduction of spell slots is in like 3.5, because they had a slot for the level of spell a sorcerer could cast, but there was no spell that was predetermined. There was no spell they had to decide ahead of time. At the time of casting, they decide what spell they're casting at second level. Then they burn that second level usage for the day, just like a wizard would. But they didn't have to predetermine what that spell was.
That spell was.
So bards and sorcerers had access to this starting at 3.5.
So when a sorcerer goes to cast a spell and they want to decide which one they use, do they have like a known spells list that they pulled from?
So for 3.5, you basically, per your level, because you didn't have to learn them like other mages in earlier editions where you actually had to go learn the spell and then put it in your book and then you could memorize it, which was all these steps. Sorcerers were basically kind of like how we see a lot in subclasses now. Sorcerers were basically being like, hey, here's the list of spells you have access to. And then supplementals would give you
more as you level up.
And then supplementals would give you different approaches. I don't want to say the word flavor, but different approaches similar to subclasses where you might have a different section of specialized spells, but it's basically your just spell list, but you didn't have to go out of your way to game for it. You didn't have to adventure for it. It's just what you were able to have access to. Similar to how clerics work, right? Clerics don't have to worry about learning spells. You just get handed a book that says, here's all the cleric spells. Which ones do you want? Right? Like you just get cleric spells. So essentially sorcerers worked like clerics, but from the aspect of magic, not divine, right? So the sorcerers are basically the clerics of wizards.
Clerics of wizards. Okay, wait. I see that.
Because they're the mid between, right? They just have a list they can choose from, but they also don't have to predetermine what they're going to cast until the moment they cast it. So it gives them a lot more flexibility, right? And I love that they did that with bards too, because bards are, very intuition, right? It's all based on the moment and feeding off of what's happening.
Did they balance that by significantly shrinking the pool that the sorcerers could pull from?
That's where I think they did with the supplementals, where they spread it out. I do think it was initially a limited list, not a vastly limited, but I don't think they just had every spell that wizards had. I think there were a few that were chopped off. But again, a lot happened between 3 and 3.5, so it's very hard to remember exactly which things were done. Okay. But I do know that sorcerers didn't have a 1-to-1 spell list with wizards.
Okay, interesting.
Just like with druids, you know how like druids have a lot of overlap, but they don't have a 1-to-1. And same thing with clerics, there's overlap, but they all don't have 1-to-1. Same thing with sorcerers, and I think bards. I think outside of like a handful of bard things, I think bards also were the same thing. They pretty much had a 1-to-1, but I think sorcerers had kind of like clerics or druids. I think they had like their own little Venn diagram version of it. And then this is also where paladins also as well were granted a wider spell list, but it was still more restricted than the cleric spell list. So they kind of just expanded a little bit more on what paladins could do.
What edition did paladins get introduced?
Paladins, let's see. I don't know if it was in 2nd or 1st edition. I know it was in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Because
I want to say it was 1st edition, but we'll double check.
What I recall about paladins is they are very limited in their magic, and the majority of their magic is used to enhance.
It is 1st
physical.
edition.
They're more of like they're more like fighters that make themselves stronger divinely, right?
Yeah,
And
and
it's
that's and
like,
that's and
hey,
that's
I'm gonna
why
hit you
that's
with
why
my
it says that
sword,
there's
but
even a
I'm
more
gonna
restricted spell
smite
list.
you. I'm gonna smite you. I'm gonna use this to buff my armor. I'm gonna use this to increase my speed. And so for them, it's just you're saying it's just an isolated spell list, kind of like sorcerers.
Yeah, because
Limiting them a little bit
they
more.
don't have like where the clerics have like all of these spells, right? I mean, you can have paladins. I mean, they get like lay on hands, they get smite, they get like in certain editions or certain supplementals, you get like the actual spell divine
Was lay
intervention.
on hands a spell before?
I think it was before. I think it was either a
Really
cantrip or a first level. But yeah, it just they have
interesting.
magic, but it was extremely limited. Third edition, they gave them a handful of more access, but it really was it was a lot more restrictive than clerical magic, right? Like it's just a delineation of but they're still on the Vancian system. So again, with that, it was all predetermined beforehand, right? Like even paladins had that predetermined, had to choose what they had access to. So if they had bless, if they
Memorize
had
spells,
smite, if
basically.
they had whatever that was, they had to choose it. And then and then with 3 and 3.5, the biggest change they made to losing spells was they did expand what conditions could affect spellcasting, as well as curses could start to affect spellcasting. So they just kind of took the ideas from
Elaborate.
second
I'm not sure what that
edition.
means.
So like they created more curses. Like there was a couple curses from 3.5 that could like stop you from being able to cast magic or take your magic levels or limit what you could do, or
Oh,
just
okay.
generally do it. You had and then you had other things like certain conditions where like being knocked out. I think this is where officially like being knocked out or stunned would actually start to like reduce your ability to cast magic, and they also expanded a little bit on what can interrupt you as well, like in combat, different things that you could do to just fine tune what an interruption actually means, right? If you didn't have counter spell,
Okay.
what can you do during combat and things like that. And then let's see here. So before we get into 4th and 5th edition, because that's where it really changes, right? 4th did something completely different. 5th is something that we know now. So up until 3.5, we've been using the Vancian system. So that's where I kind of want to deviate real quick and just kind of do a small discussion, a little history lesson on the Vancian system, because this was something that, again, I hadn't heard in a long time, and it was kind of fun just looking back into. And essentially, this was the inspiration. So it's so funny, right? We talk about doing our own homebrew, and there's a lot of memes and jokes about homebrewing and DMs basically like utilizing all of their pop culture references and all the things that they love, right? And bringing it into D&D, and how like some people love that, some people don't. Some people think, oh, you got to be all more about the book, right? You got to like be it. But at the same time, it's like you guys got to, I always think like, remember D&D had to be created at some point, right? It had all of its own influences. I mean, most of the original D&D lore is based off of real mythos and real lore, right? And so this is one of those fun things where I think about how I've started to develop a unique approach to magic using D&D rule sets, but also using the Dresden Files series as a inspiration to work magic into how it works and how to explain how things flow with magic in my realm. And it's interesting because I look back on the history of the Vancian system, and that's essentially what D&D did. The original guys took another magic system from something else and said, you know what? That's how it should work in D&D, contrary to the popularity that of other systems that use mana or other systems that used systems of like power level instead of like memorization level, right? So this was actually kind of contrary to the normal step of magic and what would follow. Even after this, as video games came out, D&D was the only one who stepped away from this concept of like a magic pool, or this, like what you've talked about, this like infinite ability to cast magic, in terms of it doesn't matter what I cast, it's all a matter of how long I can cast, right? So I always found that really interesting, that this was their inspiration when they were trying to come up with a magic system that worked for this tabletop game. They found something that would work for them. And Again, this system was all based around memorization and preparation of spells before they were necessary. And then once cast, that spell was no longer usable. And again, differs from what we've seen in RPGs and everything else like that, from mana, spell points, spell slots, all of that kind of stuff. And then we all know that we've moved away from this, which is why I wanted to stop at 4th edition, because that's where we started to see a difference. But the Vancing system was actually originally introduced way back in 1974 in D&D, but it was inspired by a novel series called Dying Earth. It's the Dying Earth series by Jack Vance, which is where we get the name Vancing system from. And so the Vancing system is basically wizards needed to memorize a spell in order to use it, and it wipes itself from the caster's mind after it was cast. The origin of the D&D magic system, I'm just kind of basically reading off of a fandom page right now, so this is not my own script, this is just what I found on it. But as described by Gary Gygax, the Vancing system was decided to emulate that magic from the novel, as Gygax himself felt it was very versatile and short-spoken spells were best suited for realities of dungeon and adventuring, right? So the idea that it wasn't about these, like what we've talked about, rituals, right? It wasn't about the idea of magic where you had to set up the candles and write out the chalk and chant for 20 minutes. The idea of magic in Dungeons and Dragons, his idea was these quick, few words, few gestures, magic happens so we can keep the game moving, right? So that's where he found the inspiration of this book series, of being able to have these spells ready to go and just on the hand be able to get them out there, right? Instead of this, this big parade of what you had to do in order to get magic done in the ways that we would think of it. He also found that other magic systems in fiction were too complex or time-consuming, which is what he was quoted as saying, and to take place in a melee combat specifically. So it's not just that it was for the narrative aspect, but in combat, standard magic didn't make sense, right? Like, how is someone who just swung at you, how are you going to quickly do a spell if it's not Avada Kedavra, right? Like, if it's not an instant gesture and a word, how does that make sense? It's like, oh, you slashed me. You know what? How dare you do? You know what? When I light all of these, you are gonna be in so much trouble, Mister. Like, you're just like lighting candles like it. Yeah. Like, what are you gonna do the whole time? It doesn't make any sense. So I do like that. I like that he was really trying to think out. I mean, it feels like always listening to Gary Gygax. I could see why I take a lot of inspiration from him, because he sounds like what we us. Like, if we were to talk to him back then, it's like it sounds like how we want to approach D&D, what makes the most sense and what makes the best feel, not just for the narrative, but for the gameplay for everybody, right? And then, so this is one of his quotes back in 2007. So this is like many years later after the creation of it, right? This is when it's, still, it's not quite as popular. I mean, it wasn't until about, 5th edition, 2014 that it really blew up again, I would say. Or was it 2014? I want to say it was like around then. So that's where I know that it got its second wave of popularity. But back in 2007, he said, the memorize, then fire and forget principle for casting spells Jack Vance assumed in his fantasy series seemed the perfect to me for use by D&D magic users. It required forethought by the player and limited the power of the class all at once. I still like the concept, even though I have gone to a mechanical energy point system in the Legendary Adventure RPG. So even Gygax in 2007, who did his own new RPG, the Legendary Adventure, went to this magical energy, but he still says, or at least still believes in the Vancing system as a better representation of how magic should operate in a game of adventure.
Conceptually, at least, yeah.
And then he goes on to talk about the original, the actual short story from the Dying Earth series that actually really inspired it. Essentially, in the series, they talked about books that the wizards had to study to memorize the spells, and essentially they were volumes compiled by many wizards of the past, basically just mass portfolios of random notebooks and documents. So no order, it wasn't like an encyclopedia. It was just, here's, like kind of like an unsolved case file. It's like, here you go. Here's 300 years of writings about this type of magic. And then, they were put together as best you could, but you had to spend time enough to read through it, decipher it. So that's the mindset of like, this is why you had to prep it, because it wasn't clear, concise, and easy, right? It wasn't a recipe. It was 15 different people's journals all talking about different viewpoints, and you have to piece that all together. So I kind of like, why this inspired him, right? This like tactile feel. And I guess that's why, you can kind of see that in the way I've talked about magic, and why I feel magic is that way a lot, right? It's this idea that it's been curated and grown over time, through master and apprentice, through, wizard of all ages. And it's, there are some things that are, easy, that are just out in the masses, right? Those like the spells that they've created, the ones that are on scrolls. But then there's like the unknown magic, right? The magic that's still not perfected, the magic that people are still working on, right? That's where the fun stuff can really happen, but also the dangerous stuff.
Very true. Very true.
And then there was another aspect in that same series that they quote as well, talking about why they also like the system, because for the mages, once the magic was used, they had a sense of helplessness. Once the spell had been expected and you didn't have anything else prepped, right? If you used your one spell and it didn't go off and you had nothing else prepped, right? If you weren't prepared, that feeling of, oh shit, I'm a glass cannon. Like that's where they absolutely intended the glass cannon right from the get-go, because they wanted the mage to feel like they could do this, bend the fabric of reality. But if you're not properly prepared, what are you? You know what I mean? Like you're nothing else. Kind of like Iron Man without a suit. You're just a man.
Did they have a system for them to be prepared outside of their spells, or was it just you better hope your spell goes off?
Most of the time it was you better, like especially in the early editions, it was you better hope your spell goes off, because wizards, especially pre-fourth, limited on armor, limited on weapons. In second edition, weapon proficiencies, being able to learn, being able to protect yourself, very, very limited. The most limited of all the classes, in fact, in second edition. Basically, yeah, if you, in earlier editions, the wizard was in all respects the glass cannon. You protected it because it was the thing that could help turn the tide, right? Like it was that's where we got the stereotype that the wizard just all out does the damage and then falls to the sideline, because that's just, it's always been their role. Their role has been the smart one. Be prepared, be ready, but you're not the main hero, right? You know what I mean? Like you're not going to be the last man standing unless, you ran kind of thing. But you were meant to have that like super massive impact on the battlefield. At least that was the inspiration, right? That was the idea of,
right,
all of these other guys are strong, they're fast, they're durable, they have a lot of stamina, they have all of this other stuff, but none of them are bending the fabric of reality. None of them are changing the very nature of how things work around them. They may be able to take more hits than you. They may be able to intimidate more people. They may be able to smack things harder. But none of them are going to survive in the middle of the wilderness until you erupted flame from nothing. No, they're not, clerics walk around measly until people are starving and they can generate food and water from nothing. Like, I get that there is a trope that wizards are kind of weak, but narratively speaking, they were always meant to be the ones that they were smart enough they didn't need to fight. That was, I think, always the intention of wizards, was as a class, wow, excuse me. As a glass cannon, the intent was to be smarter than the enemy, not faster, right? I think now we believe more of a gunslinger mindset when it comes to wizards, right? You want to be fast with your spells. You want to have quick, easy spells. That's I think why you see Eldritch Blast being really popular with spellcasters. Things that can pump out damage, go quick, things that I can stack up a few of. Like the idea that I don't have an unlimited, but I want to be able to either pinpoint a shot from across the battlefield, or I want to be able to fan my hammer and get some damage out, right? But I think originally they were always intended to be more of the tactician, more of the the mind on the battlefield, trying to figure out when and where I need to place my nuke kind of idea. So I find that really interesting. Of the original idea and how it became are definitely not on the same plane, and I don't think one's better or worse than the other. But I do find it interesting that where their original mindset was for Wizards has much deviated from where we see it now, or it has deviated from that.
I would definitely agree.
And rightfully so. I do 100% agree that Wizards have every right to be as powerful and versatile as they are now. But knowing the limitations, having played the original editions and had the very strict rule sets, hearing this, I fully understand now. Like, if you ever see those content creators like the Skit guys for D&D who talk about like how bad Wizards were in the past, you know, like if they do like the first edition Wizard versus fifth edition, and they like try to compare them and see like why they're so bad, and it's like fair. Like I said, that in those respects, those arguments, I totally understand why the changes were made, and again, Wizards deserve to be where they are now. But with context, the Wizards of old made a lot more sense, narratively speaking. You know what I mean? It wasn't to be the all-powerful. You were already all-powerful because you did what very little could do, right? I also want to believe that they treated Magic as not as relevant or as common as most DMs play it. You know what I mean? I think Magic is seen as no one's going to be surprised to see it, whereas I think originally Magic was meant to be a surprise to see.
From the way you're describing it, because I don't have a lot of experience in that other aspect or that other realm, but the way you're describing it, it feels like Wizards of old, they were meant to be very, I don't want to say situationally, but very rarely spectacular. Like, you could do huge things in not very often. But what they've moved towards is more of what I would consider like a balancing act, where the Wizards can, in a sense, not necessarily hold their own. Like, they're still squishy. They're still not going to take a whole bunch of hits of damage. Like, they're still, they still, a lot of their power comes from what they can do, but practically they can do ish as much as any of the other classes. Like, there's a lot more it doesn't feel like you're choosing like, oh, either I'm gonna die in 3 seconds and be able to cast Fireball, or I'm gonna be able to hit every single turn but do average damage, right?
Yeah.
Now it feels like I can hit every turn and do average damage, just like I would be able to if I was a fighter, but also, if I'm not careful, I'm going to die in like 3 or 4 hits. But it's going to take 3 or 4 hits instead of just like somebody breathing on me. Like, I see all the time the tropes of like a d4 of damage, or somebody drops a piece of paper, or the wizard bends down to tie his shoe and dies from shoe tying damage. You know,
exactly.
like,
No, and again, the tropes are there, but again, like I said, I see it from both ends. I'm not saying that any direction was the wrong direction. It has merit. All sides had merit. But it's that context, right? We miss that context sometimes of remembering why and how they were so restrictive. Because again, they just didn't have these ideas. They didn't have subclasses. It wasn't D&D as we know it. You know what I mean? It was how do we tell a narrative fantasy story? But one thing that you brought up some really cool points there that I do want to point out, some interesting side notes that I have here, because these are also really fun like insights into the creators of D&D, more specifically Gary Gygax. But it's always been known, or at least it's been said, that his mindset towards the Vancian system early on and his preference towards it was his way to help balance out Magic users early on, because he always had there was always this idea that you didn't want to make it too easy for a Magic user to outpace the warriors, right? Like, if you had too many spells too soon, if you had too much stronger spells too early, what would stop you from wiping the battlefield with your biggest, strongest hit? Or what's to stop you from, manipulating with multiple spells the battlefield to the point to where you're overcoming everybody else, right? So there was this for many years that was the mindset, was this was his way of balancing it out. But it has come out from people who know him. This is the kind of like fun background, right? Is it's always been public that it was their way of balancing magic, because as you can obviously understand, like in a game of adventuring where people have to smack things, someone who can throw fireballs from, 30 feet away naturally is going to be the better pick, right? You had to have this idea where I can't have unlimited, right? So there's, I understood the argument that this was about balance. But it's also a fun little tidbit about Gary Gygax himself is he says that, he likes the Vancian system because of the novel, but more so than that novel, one of his favorite IPs, like growing up and just in general, was Conan. And this has also had a lot of his like closest friends basically point out, like, Gary Gygax has a very big bias and lean towards melee fighters and just the fighter class in general. Like, it's always been known he has an affinity towards the fighting class and has always had a preference for it. So it's those interesting things where it's like, oh yeah, I'm just here to balance out the magic users so they don't get more powerful than my fighter, because you don't get more powerful. Like, it's that subtle hint of you're trying to make a balanced game, but are you actually balancing it for all the right reasons, or are you just trying to make sure? So not that he did anything wrong or tried to like make magic users worse, but over the years people have just pointed out that the glass cannon may have been more glass than cannon early on.
That actually makes me curious. I don't know if you know this off the top of your head. You don't have to look it up otherwise, but I'm curious if you know when like classes like Barbarian were introduced. Because as somebody who's into, a lot of melee fighters, like Monks is definitely a new addition. A lot of the other melee classes that we have now are kind of more new additions, but, I feel like the Barbarian is I don't know. I feel like it's kind of a staple. I feel like it should at least been around 3.5 or something to that effect, or some sort of like Berserker, even if it wasn't called Barbarian, some sort of like really big heavy hitter type class outside of, because when I think of
that was also
fighter
first edition. It was one of the earlier subclasses of fighter, and subclass wasn't what we call it today. It just means like thief was a subclass of rogue. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that, it wasn't quite a subclass, but they had, mage, and then you had like illusionist and sorcerer, right? So they were all mages.
Yeah.
So that's where we get that. But yeah, so technically barbarians came in as first as AD&D first edition, Unearthed Arcana in 1985.
That makes
it
sense.
Actually was official though. The official class was introduced in 1982. The subclass of the fighter, and then the barbarian appears in AD&D and Unearthed Arcana in 85 again, along with the cavalier. Okay, and that came out later. So yeah, so we've had barbarians for all of AD&D at least. So OD&D probably didn't have the split, and that's again that typically is where a lot of the history lies. Is once they went from Dungeons and Dragons and officially made it Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and cleaned it up a lot and really made it public, that's where a lot of these things got cleaned up. A lot of the areas where the specialties had names instead of just being a fighter who could do XYZ. You're now a swordsman, right? Like they started to compile and make things a lot more I don't want to say cookie cutter, but more approachable.
Okay.
And yeah, so the Vancian system was just something that I always felt was interesting, because I remember having talked about this many years ago, but it just it never really clicked until we started doing the show that they were influenced by their own pop culture just as much as we were when they were creating this. You would think that, magic system, they probably just, made up what was, we knew it would be influenced by what you have. But this wasn't just influence. I mean, he directly says, I read this book, I liked that magic, and boom, that's how I have my magic, right? That's not just being influenced. That is a direct one-to-one, like, this is based right directly from this. So it is just kind of cool to see that from the original creators, seeing them use something that they really like and pouring it into it. It also makes me really curious that that mention for Conan with Gary Gygax. It'd be really interesting to look at the fighter class and really compare it to Conan, like all of the details, maybe the lore, and just like the known history of Conan, and just see how much we could point out was maybe influenced. You know, like certain abilities you could do, a certain weapon. I'm just a certain ability, like or a certain feat. Just really curious if he specifically like pointed out, like, or if we could figure out how he influenced it enough so where you could basically build a Conan character, because you know he had to, right? He had to have tried.
Talking about all of this is getting me kind of curious about practically how certain things would work. Because theoretically, you're a wizard and you have to memorize spells. Like, where do you memorize your spells from? Your spell
That's where you
book,
get your book. Yeah, that's where you have your spell book. That's why you have to learn spells.
But the question is this. Theoretically, if I memorize a certain number of spells, but I still have my spell book on me, like, I'm thinking if it would be possible for me to cast a spell that I don't have memorized from my spell book.
Yes, but then you would lose it from your spell book. It would work just similar to a scroll, where it would consume the spell and the writing as the spell component, just as it does in a scroll. That would be typically how it used to be done. Yeah, because typically what happens is the original Vancian system, you'd have to learn the spell. So you'd actually have a roll. It would be a percentile roll to learn spell, meaning you'd have to practice with it. You have to be able to understand it. Once you learned the spell, then you would be able to cast it as long as you memorized it. But you then would also have to have a copy of the spell in your spell book, which it had its own rules. Once you had it in your spell book, then you can memorize it at any time. But there were supplemental rules where if you didn't have a spell memorized, but it's in your spell book, you could cast it from your spell book, but you lose the writing, meaning you can't memorize it in the future.
So raw with lore, where is the magic coming from when you cast a memorized spell?
Typically when you transcribe, like originally the idea was that when you transcribed something in your spell book, you're typically using a specialty type of ink. And the idea, similar to how you cast a spell now, or a scroll, like a lot of the times, scroll with lore was that
memorized spell.
No, I know. I'm just trying to give a whole picture because, like, when you made scrolls, the ink was really supposed to be super special. The paper was supposed to be nice, and the writing of it was also part of the ritual that allowed you to cast it from the scroll. Originally, you just had to have a spell in your spell book to memorize it, and originally, if you didn't have it memorized, you weren't casting it because it wasn't a scroll. There was a delineation between written spells and scrolls. Any written spell was not a scroll at one point. I think it was either second edition or third edition that had a supplemental that introduced the optional variation where any spell that was written could be cast at the cost of the spell's writing itself. I don't remember if that was something like Tasha's Cauldron or Xanth. I don't remember what supplemental introduced it, but it wasn't official. Like, it wasn't like an official, this is how spells work, but it opened up the idea for people that had the same question as you of, if I don't have it memorized, but I have the spell in front of me, why can't I cast it? And to get around that, that's where, because again, if that's the case, right? If they allowed that as rules as written,
specifically, I just want to know from your perspective, what is the lore like? I'm not really worried about what the rules or the mechanics say according to the book, but like the lore, the mindset, like practically, if I'm a wizard, real life in the real world, and I have a spell book, and I am memorizing spells, okay, and I am casting a memorized spell. My book is in my pocket. I'm casting a memorized spell. When I cast that spell, the spell that's in my spell book doesn't disappear.
Right.
So
because you've made a copy of it.
The magic that I'm using, I've made a copy of it in my brain. I wrote it down in my brain.
That's how the Vancian system works. That's exactly how the Vancian system works and how D&D describes it. When you memorize a spell, you are compartmentalizing parts of your brain. It's not just memorizing words. You were actually physically taxed during this process, as it's described in the book, not just the Vancian book, but D&D. As D&D describes it, it is a taxing process where you are basically, it's like a physical workout for your brain, because as you're memorizing all the pieces that you need, you're not just memorizing it to perfect it, you are physically putting magic at all of those little things. When you memorize a word or a phrase, you're parsing magic into your brain. You are physically storing magical energy in your body and in your brain, which is why when you cast the magic, that's why it's released, why it's gone. It's not just, well, if I know the words and I know the hand gesture, why can't I do it? It's a bit because where's the energy? The memorization is how you bring in the energy, store it inside of you, and that's why when you release it, that's why you forget it, and that's why you can't just memorize a spell permanently outside of like cantrips. That's how they started to explain cantrips. Cantrips would be easier ideas, right? You wouldn't have to memorize cantrips because those became, by rules as written and by lore, those became the magic that's so easy you can just reproduce it because of questions like that.
That lore, then why wouldn't I be able to memorize the same spell twice?
That's why they changed it, because in 3rd edition they did open up, or was it 3rd edition or 2nd edition that opened that up, because I remember, so the idea was, again, that it wasn't really thought out in terms of like, why can't you memorize? It was just a limiting factor for magic. They eventually did say, hey, why can't I just memorize the same spell twice? There was a lot of pushback from the other creators and just from the general mindset of it kind of broke the Vancian system. Because again, it was heavily influenced by another novel series, and in that novel series, they basically explained it as the compartmentalization. You could only do one version of it, and so you only had enough room to do different spells, but you technically couldn't memorize the same spells and have the same spots in your brain, kind of like you can't have two things occupy the same place. That was their mindset. It was directly taken from the other one. They eventually allowed you to have more than one spell, but still to some people's dislike. Some people thought that it was too far taken away from the Vancian system, but that's where they started to understand, but that's where it made more sense for D&D. The Vancian system was great to start out with, but like you're pointing out, it just falls short of real magic. I should be able to do the same magic spell twice. There's nothing that feels like it should stop me. And that's where spell slots started to get introduced. By the way, I do also have a mention that spell slots were officially introduced in 3rd edition as the term, not the way that we know them, but because of sorcerers that we were talking about, that's where they said, hey, sorcerers, because you don't memorize, you have a slot for magic. That's when we first used the term spell slot. Then we got into that as a base mechanic, but that's when the term was coined. But yeah, so the whole lore and mechanic behind memorization was that you were the storage of magic. And it wasn't like they said you can't store the same magic. It was more of they just didn't think about it. It was like, no, you only get one of each spell. We don't want it to be too powerful. And Vancian system says that when you memorize a spell, you can only have one at a time. That's what their original book said, so that's what they wrote. Then eventually, what was it? Let me double check. I think it was 3rd edition. So 3rd edition made notable changes to the Vancian system. Characters no longer memorize spells, but characters no longer memorize spells, but do prepare them. The thematic difference, but functionally identical. So each potential available spell is referred to as a spell slot. Character classes now have 0 level spell slots used for casting weak spells known as cantrips. And then more specifically, several character classes cast spontaneous, whereas they can freely cast from a list of known spells, like the sorcerer. Although they are still limited to a certain number each day. Vancian spellcasters in 3rd edition, what they did was they received more spells at early levels, like things like bonus spell slots and stuff. And then they just got some bonuses. So there were Vancian options where you prepared, but you didn't memorize. So we got rid of the term memorization, and you just said, if you were just a regular wizard, these are the spells I'm taking with me today. So there was no thematic, I'm memorizing, I'm storing. It was more like just tell me what you can cast today. And then we got into spell slots where it's, here's just a list of anything you can cast if you want to. So up until 3rd edition, some spellcasters still had to decide ahead of time, but spell slots were becoming more popular because other spellcasters didn't have to choose up until they cast the spell. So that's where they just needed a slot, a whole placeholder.
Right.
But then the Vancian system died in 4th edition. They finally got rid of it. So 4th edition abandoned it altogether. The core spellcasting mechanic in 4th edition, they went down to breaking it down, not to like spell slots, but to ability time frames, right? So I don't know what they called them. It was frequency based. They had at will, encounter, and daily.
Spells, at will. Yes.
So instead of having you can cast so many spells a day, you could have 5 daily spells. So that means you could cast all 5, only once per day each. But if you had those, and then you had 3 at wills, that's 8 spells I can cast, right? So there wasn't a number that I was limited to. It was how often you could do it in fourth. Excuse me.
It's lightweight, like they had a recharge time, like
it was more of a
recharge.
So you had the daily, the encounter, and at will powers, and then basically after that it was just just your spell list changed after that. So that's what 4th edition did. And then 5th edition went more into the flexible, they call it a flexible derivative of the Vancian system. But essentially, spellcasting characters now prepare spells each day, but may spontaneously cast those up to a limit of a certain number of spells each day. The system, basically, again, it's what we see as spellcasting now of spell slots. It depends on which type you are, but either you pre-choose it or you don't, but you have your spell slots, and that's kind of what you're doing with them, right?
Right.
And that's pretty much it. That's where the Vancian system eventually just kind of died out. But I thought that was an interesting little history on where spellcasting came from and why it feels so different over the editions. Because again, it wasn't even a unique idea. It was an idea they took from another series, another novel, and made it into something that made more sense for adventuring. Which again, I think historically, I think this is amazing. I 100% agree with everything that they've done to it. While I, like Gary Gygax, have a fondness for the Vancian system personally, I fully understand that as a game, as a tabletop, and as the history has gone by, I 100% agree with what they've done with it. I think that they've made all of the right calls and made all of the right modifications to Magic to make it more palatable, even though I kind of prefer the Vancian system in terms of mechanical and lore. I also understand why this is a lot better of a system, like in 5th edition.
Right. And so is 5th edition like its own unique system? Because I mean, clearly they didn't.
So it's technically a derivative of they call it a derivative of the Vancian system because they still, like in 3rd edition, some classes still have to predetermine, they have to pre-select what spells they have access to that day. Mm-hmm. And then everybody else gets the spell slots that are open. That's really the only callback to the original system, is that some classes still have to say, hey, I can have, these are the 3 level 1 spells I can cast. Like, now, which ones I cast, right? Like, I could say, here's 3 level 1 spells, but I could choose one to keep casting all of my spell slots at, right? I've prepared it.
Yes.
I can cast it as many times as I want for however many spell slots I have. Whereas the original Vancian system, I would have to memorize it or prepare it for every spell slot, right? Every spell slot would have a spell assigned to it. Now in 5th edition, you just have a list of spells you've chosen you can cast and a number of spell slots to cast them at, but in any combination. Instead of saying this slot for this spell, it's just that any of these slots for any of these spells in any combination, or one spell over and over and over, right? So that's the major difference that we get from the original Vancian system. The only real callback is that you choose your spells ahead of time. That's the only thing that's been kept. So I wouldn't call it its own thing. It's just it's like what 5th edition has done for a lot of stuff. They harken back to tradition, but make it more acceptable to the modern community, right? So they do a lot of things that are reminiscent of the past, but obviously much better streamlined for today.
Applicable. Yeah.
But yeah, I totally get it. And then 5th edition, we're not gonna really bother about losing. There were just basically like a few abilities in like 4th edition, like being stunned or dazed, that would prevent you from magic casting, but they didn't have anything advanced. But for 5th edition, now that it's been changed, right? So now coming all the way back to our topic at hand, losing powers. So with 5th edition, you still have the preparation for like wizards, clerics, and druids. They have to select what spells they have, but they can cast them at any number of times equal to their spell slots. Then you have the spontaneous casters, sorcerers, and bards still get, to cast any spell from, the list that they have access to. Paladins, again, have a limited number of spells, and they prepare them similar to the clerics, using up the spell slots and pre-preparing them. So again, still the Vancian system. Now, in 5th edition, losing abilities is basically boiled down to concentration. two aspects. One is concentration. Basically, more powerful spells require concentration to keep up. So taking damage, falling, or failing a concentration check, anything like that would take you out of the spell. So that's one way to lose your spellcasting ability. And then, of course, we also have exhaustion and other conditions. So you can have, exhaustion paralysis, or again, like we said before, like dazed or stunned. These things can prevent you from being able to use your magic. So nothing really on the books that made you lose your magic, like we've talked about in the previous editions that had supplementals. Like if you got knocked out, there were supplementals that said that you would lose your memorization. But since we don't have memorization anymore, it's just preparation. And as long as you have a spell slot and a spell prepared, it doesn't matter. Unless you're under a specific condition or exhaustion, you have access to that magic. So that is one thing that I feel makes wizards a lot more powerful in 5th edition, which again, we've talked about, in all of my renditions of high point magic, that there's a reason why I split the magic the way I did, because I didn't like that all wizards were subject to the same magic loss. But I will say that in 5th edition, I feel like there should be more to magic loss. I feel like this isn't enough, right? Like the fact that I could literally knock you out, forcibly knock you unconscious, and you could just get up and start wielding magic again, just doesn't sit well with me. You know what I mean? I don't mean like all magic, and again, I don't want all magic users to be under the same guise of if you get knocked out, all magic's off. But kind of like what I did in High Point, where each type of wizard or each type of mage or spellcaster has a different way to access their magic, therefore a different way to lose access. This is basically saying, as long as, you have a prepared spell, which you always do, like the moment you choose to be a spellcaster, you choose your very first list of spells, and so you're always going to at least have something prepared, and as long as you have a spell slot. So it's just that thing of, realistically, unless you're exhausted or have a condition, you always have your magic, and I feel like that might be making wizards a little too powerful, because even if I take your wizard book...
In earlier editions, was there ever like a time limit associated with preparing your spells?
It was always assumed you would re-prepare, or at the start of every day, or after a long rest, whatever you want to call it. It was always assumed you would reselect, but again, once they changed to prepare, you just said what spells you were choosing, right? It was only upon the memorization only changed if you were changing up spells, but no, there was no, at this time you have to choose. There wasn't ever a timeline. It was just assumed at the start of every day.
Not like a time, like a day you had to do it, but like a time that it takes to do so. Like, does it take an hour to prepare spells? Does it take 5 minutes? Does it take 30 seconds? Like, how long does it take to prepare a singular, or a group of spells?
It changed throughout each of the editions. So let's see. So I think in 2nd edition, it's let's see. So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, taking 15 minutes per spell level to memorize.
Per spell level?
Yeah, so a 2nd level spell would cost you 30 minutes. A 5th level spell would cost you an hour and a half, or hour 15 minutes.
So if you are a 20th level caster and you want to prepare 1 9th level spell, 5 7th level spells, and all this stuff, like that's going to take you a long time to prepare. Like, you're spending your entire day just preparing spells.
Well, but exactly.
That's a whole day. Just preparing the spells you want to be able to cast throughout the day. Like, it could be potentially 8 hours just for you to prepare your spells.
They did eventually reduce it to 10 minutes. But yeah, so if you do like a quick thing, right? So a 9th level spell would originally have taken you 2 hours. And now it's down to 90 minutes. But for a 9th level spell, it would take you 90 minutes to memorize it by original, right? And then, yeah, so basically it was you rise and you immediately start memorizing everything you have to. And that's where, again, this is also probably why you see they didn't really have a hard, strict loss of memorization rule, because without a loss of memorization rule, once you memorize that spell, you never lost it until you cast it. It wasn't until the supplemental rule, that's why they added the supplemental rule that if you get knocked out, go to sleep, you would lose it. But that supplemental rule wasn't a core rule set because of exactly what you're bringing up. Originally, once you memorized it, you had it until you cast it. It never went away. You had that until you either cast it or chose to memorize another one. So there wasn't it wasn't like you only had it for 24 hours.
If a DM is so you don't only have it for so even if I take a long rest, I don't have to prepare something new.
Oh, correct. That's what I'm saying. That was a supplemental rule that eventually was introduced for harder gameplay. But rules as written, like the core rule set, you never lost memorization until it was cast. That was the original rule set. So the moment you had that, so yeah, it may cost you 2 hours to memorize a 9th level spell, but only 2 hours after you've cast it. So you memorize your 9th level spell. If you don't cast it for 2 weeks, you don't cast it for 2 weeks. That was the original rule set. Again, only a supplemental
So
eventually gave it harder rules.
So say I'm an adventurer and I'm going to dungeon dive, right? And before I go into this dungeon, I prepare all of my spells. 9th level all the way back, all right? And say I have like 10 of them, something like that. And I go through like the first level of this dungeon and I only need to cast a level 1 and a level 2 spell. I go to sleep, I wake up, all I have to do is re-prepare a level 1 and a level 2 spell. All my other spells are just chilling.
Correct. There'd be no reason for you to memorize or re-prepare unless you're using the supplemental rules. And the supplemental rules were, I think with the supplemental rules, they also reduced it to it was either per spell or it was per spell level. So it was like, not like a second level, but like a 10 minutes per spell level. So it would be like 10 minutes for a level 1, 10 minutes for or 20 minutes for a level 2, 30 minutes for a level 3, but not like per level of the spell. So it's not like a level 3 or yeah. So I think they adjusted the time down to basically kind of make it more of a morning activity, but it was every day. So you still spent like the first hour or two, but that was it. It was kind of you spend an hour or two beginning of your day, but you rememorize. But the supplemental also, I think, presented it as if you don't want to hold on to your spells, this is basically your supplemental opportunity to kind of get new spells every day. Because some people would be like, well, hey, I've memorized my spell, we're in a dungeon, but I don't have time to change my spell up, but we know that I have the wrong spell memorized. So the supplemental, I think, was also designed to help with that. Like halfway through a dungeon, if you're using the supplemental, you would just take your rest, wake up, and you have a much shorter amount of time.
So you couldn't do that anyways.
You could, like, technically you could rememorize it. It would just take you it would take you the 2 hours if it was a 9th level spell. The supplemental just was supposed to kind of say, hey, in the same 2 hour period, you can memorize all of your spells, but you have to do that every day. So again, it was a supplemental trying to balance out, you have every day to change up your spells. It's not going to cost you all day to do it, but you do have to do it every day. So you have to so if you get woken up suddenly, you have no spells. You have to be, so it was this weird balance of, you either get a lot of opportunity to change up your spells every single day, but not have them immediately, or you have it until you use it. So I think that's why that supplemental came out, but that's also why it wasn't the standard. Because again, when you have a level 9 spell, you're just going to hold on to it until you use it. It's just, why else? And then it also helped you to where you didn't have to keep your wizard book on you. You can leave your spell book at home, go do the dungeon dive, and leave your spell book safely at home to where you can come back and get it after you need it, right? You don't need your spell book with you if you weren't constantly memorizing your spells, and your spell book is like, your pride and joy. So why would you have that in danger, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like that's why I said there's a lot of merit to going to the spell slot system, because the way that the memorization system works, it's great narratively speaking, but it's not as accessible to a lot of people in terms of making a very streamlined game. You know what I mean? Like, to a lot of people. It's one thing to say the advancing system works for like long-term gaming groups like ours, right? People who are going to game with for a long time, you're going to get a standard character, they're going to grow into it, they're going to use it a lot. But when you have something like 5th edition and the way that the market's played now, where people are just churning characters, going from one gaming group to the next, a lot of that you're really going to look at it as you want something a little bit more fast-paced, something I could pick up and move on with. Now I just have a set list of spells and I can just roll with it, right? Spell slots make it a lot easier, makes it a lot better for me to pick up. I don't have to, like you were saying, I don't have to pick and choose every single game I play with every single spellcaster. It doesn't make me overthink every single game. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that is definitely a benefit, especially with the way that people make characters nowadays. If you imagine if you wanted to make 2 different spellcasters, but having to methodically think every gameplay, do I have the right spells? Versus, I'll just use these 5 today, right? Like, it's a lot more approachable, I think, for people that don't want to put that much tactical thought into it.
Okay.
But yeah, that is pretty much, the long and short of where we went from the Vancine system to 5th edition, how you've been able to lose access to casting magic. And yeah, it basically just all really came down. I mean, we pretty much always had a way to interrupt it. But outside of that, it's, your conditions that could stop you from being able to cast. And again, unless you're using a supplemental, D&D never really went the route of allowing you to lose. Like, you could lose the ability to cast magic, but you won't ever lose your magic, right? Like, you may know a spell, but you're not ever going to there's nothing that will stop you from the spell you prepared. You may not be able to cast it in the moment, but you're always going to have it prepared. It's nothing's going to take that preparation away from you. That's something that D&D just doesn't have and hasn't really leaned into since, like, 2nd or 3rd edition.
Now, on that note, you and I think we talked, maybe last Friday, lightweight about this, but the idea of a much grander scale losing your magic. Imagine you are a warlock and you break your pact with your patron. Imagine you are a cleric and you disgrace your god. Imagine you are a paladin and you break your oath. What does that look like, losing
You're jumping
your
ahead of the
magic?
conversation that we're not there yet.
Oh, I didn't know if that was already a part of where you were headed, but
Yeah,
that was the.
We're just talking about
part that-
spellcasters right now. No, we're just talking about right. First part was just trying to go through spellcasting as the basic. We're gonna get into paladins and then other classes after this, but this was just to kind of just cover how spellcasters and the general connection with magic. Like, again, other than like anti-magic field or something like that, there really isn't or hasn't been a way for you to lose your connection with magic, right? Outside of another magic spell, you could be stopped casting a spell or be prevented from casting a spell, but you'll never have the spell taken from you. You know what I mean? You never have the memorization, the preparation. It's not like you could say, I have these spells memorized, and some other evil wizard could cast another spell and say, no, you don't. You don't have those memorized anymore, or you don't have those prepared anymore.
What about psionics?
There aren't any psionics that, like, you could argue that there are, like, the telepathic psionics that you could mess with someone's head. But by the rule sets, there aren't any way for someone to remove what you know how to do in terms of magic, right? They could stop you from doing it, but they can't, take it away from you.
I mean, lightweight, imagine psychic surgery on somebody. You got your 9th level spell prepared, and I don't know, psychic surgery is a little bit more aggressive, but and like I'm pretty sure like time consuming or whatever. But could you theoretically undo that memorization, or is that
I don't see why
memorization
not.
that part of your mind?
I don't see why you couldn't adjust that aspect. Like, if you were during psychic surgery, I think that with the right roles and with the right mindset, like, I think with the right knowledge, why not? Like, if you understood the brain, you understood the mind, and how a wizard, now it may take a lot because you'd have to figure out how a wizard does that, but if you could learn how that particular wizard compartmentalized that spell, yeah, you could either disrupt it, or I would even say you could change it. Similar to, like, opening up an envelope of a letter someone already wrote and they just haven't sent it yet, you opening up the letter and changing a couple words so the letter says something different. I don't see why a skilled enough psychic surgeon couldn't do that. To where you thought you had, fireball, memorized, and instead you do something else instead, right? That works more for memorization. With preparation, it's obviously a completely different ballgame. If it's just a prepared spell, that's just a knowledge of instead of it's saved. But I like where you're going with that. I would rule in High Point that if a wizard had a memorized spell, that would be interesting. It would, because I do have, at least for the standard wizard, that you would lose memorization, but I also don't make it take 15 minutes per level to memorize. So I have the optional rule that you can basically get all of your stuff done in the morning, so you can kind of have it on hand and better changed up. But I also like the fact that if you get knocked out, you lose them too. So that's just where I like my balancing there.
Okay.
But yeah, I would absolutely rule that if you could get into a mind of somebody who has something memorized like that, yeah, you could change it up. I like that.
Okay. Cool.
All right, so moving on to paladins. So we'll cover paladins, and then we'll cover other classes as well. But the history of paladins is not as extensive as the history of magic in terms of the power ability loss, right? But we do have a couple notes from different editions, right? Because as early as first edition, the idea of losing paladinhood was thought of. Before that, there wasn't really we didn't have paladin. We said paladin was first edition, right?
Yeah, I think you said.
Yeah, 75 first edition. Yeah. So basically since AD&D, we've had paladins, and we've had, well, what happens to paladins if they don't be very paladin-y?
Were they oath based that far back?
No, oath is 5th edition only. This is all divine based. So, first edition, this is the bare bones of the original paladin. They were all based on a strict code of conduct. So, similar to what you consider an oath now, but the code of conduct was basically a strict code that they followed based on the deity that they were pledged to. And typically, paladins were fully intended to be the good guy. They were supposed to, I mean, original D&D was always meant to be heroes, right? Like, there wasn't really an idea of being the anti-hero, but you're supposed to be a hero, paladins above all else. So typically, you would serve very righteous, very good-leaning alignment gods. You were supposed to be known for bravery, honesty, charity, your unwavering faith. Like, you were supposed to be the pinnacle of everything, right? You were required to have lawful good alignment, so that also it also limited who you could be a paladin for, like, gods of other alignments, but you had to be lawful good, and any shift away from this alignment, even momentarily, could lose you your paladinhood. Like, you couldn't even just once, not even once. But losing the paladin status if you did anything to violate your code. So this could be anything that dips outside of lawful good. This could be going against your code, going against the divine, acting dishonorably, committing evil acts. Any of this could be deemed as losing your paladinhood, which would lose your title, your connection to your god. You would lose all your spellcasting that was attributed to you as a paladin, all special abilities such as lay on hands, and anything considered divine power you would instantly lose. Now with that, in first edition at least, let's see, other things that you would have. So we had like lay on hands, divine health, aura of protection, detect evil, cure disease, turn undead. At higher levels, you had other spellcasting that you would lose. You'd even lose your special mount. What's up?
I didn't realize paladins could turn undead back then.
Oh yeah, it's similar to clerics, but it was not as powerful. But it was a doled down version. But it was still kind of worked the similar way. And then they also had a special mount, the paladin's bonded mount, which also could be enhanced by abilities, would no longer be available to the paladin. So they would straight up lose everything.
Is this a physical mount, or is it like a spectral mount, kind of like in
it's a bonded mount. So it's like usually it wasn't like a magic mount. It was like a mount that you eventually like bonded with, but you would be, or it could be gifted to you, but you would lose it.
Lose it,
but it was
like
like a real. It was like a
run
real
away
mount.
from you, or you would just like say if you were sitting on it when it happened, would it just disappear, or
it would just knock you off. It was no longer. It would just basically be no longer
not be
available to you.
anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now these would basically they essentially would refer to these as fallen paladins originally, and essentially what would happen to this paladin is if you did any of this, you would immediately revert to a fighter of equivalent level. However, you would gain none of the special abilities or advantages that the fighter would normally receive. So you don't, like if you were a 10th level paladin and lost it and became a 10th level fighter, you would become a 10th level fighter, but you would not get any of the fighter abilities. Like you wouldn't get extra attack, you wouldn't get, like extra attack at that time. Like you wouldn't get any of the things that the class would give you. You would just be considered a 10th level fighter.
So then how, like, those are the things that would make you a 10th level fighter. So what would be the difference between you and a first level fighter?
Well, you would still have like your health and your stats and everything, but like essentially like your weapon specializations, you would basically get a fighter without any of the fighter benefits. So yeah, you would basically be a nothing. You would be at your strength, but you wouldn't get any of their class features. You would just be considered a fighter, but not a fighter. you're less than a class at that point. Certain magical items would even be stripped from you or just completely not work. All your attuned items as a paladin, like your holy sword, would just cease to function or disappear. But there was hints early on, because this was just basically this wouldn't happen to you unless like the game was over kind of thing. Like it wasn't originally intended to happen to you, but there was an atonement and redemption. Early on, though, this was only hinted at in the DMG, and it was basically all on the Dungeon Master. If this happened in any way that was narrative, it was kind of on the Dungeon Master to put out essentially a quest. You basically get a quest that you would give the paladin to redeem themselves. So more times than not, if this happened, it was either narrative or a complete blunder, and it was meant to be a very big punishment. But there was a way to get it back. It was just basically in the DMG, it was like, hey, DM, it's up to you. If you want to let them have it back, make them go earn it, right? And once it was, basically once they did that quest, once they atoned for it, they would get to go back to their equivalent level as nothing had ever happened. But it wasn't meant to be that way. Like, it wasn't intended that way. It was either intended to be just, you fucked up and it's completely done, or it should have been part of the narrative. But again, they put it in there because they wanted to have like the explanation of what would happen if you weren't a paladin, because obviously people were going to wonder. But this was also considered back at like first edition, this wasn't really the crowd of the min-maxers, right? Like people weren't really thinking, well, I want to be a paladin and then screw it up. Like people who chose to be paladin wanted to play that righteous, I'm going to always be the good guy character, right? The idea that you would lose it wasn't really on people's minds as that could happen. It was just more of a, well, I'm a paladin, I would never do evil, right? Like, again, it was all about the narrative, the role play. But nowadays we're a little bit more fun in being like, well, what if I want to be a paladin that falls? Like that's kind of a narrative we would want to do now.
But I could even see a moment where a paladin has what I would consider righteous anger, right? And they get righteously upset and frustrated, and in that moment they make a poor choice that might put them against their, so it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm trying to be the villain, or I'm trying to be a bad guy, or I'm trying to be a fallen paladin, but it's more like, hey, this scenario, this situation, like imagine like the Joker versus Batman, right? The Joker is the type of dude that wants Batman to go against his code. He wants to force him to kill. He wants to force him to be the hero bad guy. He wants him to break that his oath, so to speak, and there were a lot of times where, I don't want to say Batman was close, but like at the very least it feels like a lot of people would struggle with that choice, right?
Exactly.
A lot of people would struggle with, do I kill you? Do I do this thing that my code of conduct tells me not to do, even though it's from
but again,
my
that's
perspective
that's
for all
where
the right reasons.
And that makes sense. Like, we have those inspirations, right? We have those things to look to, and we have those thoughts. But early on, when this was just a group of buddies who were just trying to make this, like, that just wasn't a thing, right? Like, people weren't going out of their way to break it like that. And I don't mean break, but like the idea of a DM at that time pushing a paladin to break their code narratively makes sense from like a demon or, an evil something or another, but it wasn't like a goal. Like, and that's why I think that's my interpretation of why the rules kind of fell short, and we're just like, hey, DMs, just, if it happens, make them go on a quest, or if you did this, make them go on a quest, right? But I don't really think it was like in people's minds, paladins are going to be able to lose this, right? I think it was
this is not a
it was just a warning. You know what I mean? It was just like saying, hey, if you're a cleric, your god will get mad at you if you don't do it, right? It wasn't like there would needed to be a set rules. It was just more of a, well, you're a paladin, so we need to make it sound like you have a higher justification. But speaking of which, the further editions, like we keep saying this, the further editions got to that because obviously someone was asking those questions, because they did answer those as time went on. So in first edition, it was basically pretty clear cut. You're a righteous paladin, and we don't expect you to not be. Second edition, on the other hand, changed things up a little bit. They did have some of the similar requirements with more emphasis on behavior and less on alignment. So second edition still wanted to see you typically as good, but it was less emphasis on your alignment and your alignment shifts and more about like the character of the player, right? Like how did you play the character? What did you actually do? What were the actions you took? And then atonement was the same thing. If you fell from grace, they expanded the ideas of what types of quests you could do. I think a couple supplementals even gave paladin redemption quests out there. And then these were also they were more structured in game, like clerics. You could go, instead of it just being a DM decision, like the idea in game is like the paladin could go to their church and ask like the high priest or the cleric, I need to redeem myself. What can I do? Or you would actually ask your deity for redemption, right? So they just gave a lot more detail for DMs to work with on, hey, this is going to happen, or people might start doing this. This is how you get them back on the right track, right? But other than that, the loss was still the same. You still became a fighter of equivalent level with none of the benefits. So you basically just became a not paladin, not fighter that could swing a sword. Third edition, we're still requiring the good alignments, and still looking at the what you do, more emphasis on what you do, but losing paladin status. Same thing. A lot of it was about like willful committed acts. So you had to be willfully evil, violate your code, grossly deviate from your alignment. So whereas originally any deviation, if you weren't lawful evil, or if you weren't lawful good with everything you did and said, you could lose being a paladin. By third edition, basically if you're lawful good and out of rage or vengeance you smite somebody that didn't deserve death, you ain't gonna lose paladinhood, right? If you have to hurt somebody or kill somebody or let someone go to save a town, you're not gonna lose your paladinhood. But if you just have, like, let's say you became a paladin after your parents were offed, and you find the person that offed him. He's arrested. He's handcuffed. He's on the ground, about to be tried and actually get righteous justice, and you can't help yourself and you behead him. You're gonna lose being a paladin, because in that moment, everything told you justice is being served, and you did everything right. He is, he's unarmed. He's trapped. He's and all you cared about was your personal vengeance, right? He's not hurting anybody. He's not going to do any more evil. Killing him was not going to do anything for your paladinhood. It was purely selfish. So in those cases, that's where by third edition, it was like, you really have to go so out of your way to lose this, because you're human, right? You're human. You're trying to be the best, but you're going to falter. And I kind of like what you were saying, right? You have that like righteous vengeance. I kind of like that by third edition, they were like, you're a paladin, like, mostly be good.
It's gonna happen.
But you're a paladin, like, just do you. But I kind of like that. And then this was interesting. This is where they finally went one step further. So you still had the ability to go to a church or go use with your DM to do a quest. But they finally introduced what they called the atonement spell. And the atonement spell essentially typically revolved around a quest or a significant act. This could either be something that was able to be achievable in game and you just had to appease someone to cast the spell, or you had to go do the quest to go find the spell. But it was a little bit, they added an extra layer to where it could be fully narrative, or you could actually have this like tangible spell that would bring all of their power back. Fourth edition relaxed alignment requirements even further. And the idea even about them losing their alignments to due to alignment, like paladins losing their powers to alignment, was basically removed. Like, it was, they say relaxed, but they basically, there wasn't a way to lose being a paladin just because you did something wrong. It was a lot more focused on like roles and responsibilities. So when you chose to be a paladin, you had certain requirements that you had to fulfill. So you didn't necessarily have to be the greatest person, but you did have to fulfill those duties, whatever they would have been, right? So certain god may have said, hey, you have to, spread my name and spread the word of charity. So you could be an asshole, but you could, every bar you go to, be like, you better tip, right? Like, you better give to that orphanage. Like, you could be a jerk, but you could, do all of that kind of stuff, right? So it was more about, are you doing what you're expected to, by your religion. And that was really all 4th edition did with it. But now we get to 5th edition. Now, 5th edition, this is where they finally introduced oaths. Oaths basically trumped alignment. So oaths at this point just were like, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter what you are or who you are. It's about what you stand for, right? So the emphasis moved away from alignments, specifically to oaths that they take, oath of devotion, oath of vengeance, oath of throwing it back, whatever you want to call it. Now, breaking oaths is really where it all comes down to. A paladin that willfully breaks their oath might become an oath breaker. So before we used to call it a fallen or fallen from grace. Now it's an oath breaker. And this is actually a specific subclass for those that have forsaken their vows. So this is also something where instead of it just being your standard, you're now a useless fighter, now it's actually you are something. Like there's actually a tangible, you now are a oath breaker, and I kind of like that it's its own subclass. They actually helped refine that, which again I think is what 5th edition did best. They refined and streamlined a lot of things. The shift meant that instead of losing all your powers, you just transformed into a different type of paladin with abilities aligned to the new path. So another big shift is instead of it being this idea that you aren't worthy of being a paladin, it's more of a, okay, well, you were the wrong paladin to begin with. Now you're going to kind of move on with this new direction kind of idea. So I like that you didn't lose anything. You just became something new.
With this new change, is your deity replaced? Because I almost like the idea of, hey, you were aligned with this one deity and you had this oath with this deity and you were following these tenets with this deity, and then for whatever reason you decided to break them. You're just like, screw this, and you break them. I love the idea of like another god or deity of some sort of swooping in and just being like, oh, you're mine now. And
so that
still
would
have
be
powers.
That would be a way to do it. The biggest thing is whether or not you want to decide whether paladins are divine based or oath based, because this is specifically because it's oath based now. There really isn't a overarching deity, so it's going to be if you're the oath of virginity.
To a deity?
No, it's
The
not
oath can
like
just be
like
to
the
anything?
oath of. It could be the oath of vengeance. It could be literally, I'm taking an oath of vengeance because people burned my town down. So your entire paladinhood is literally about getting back at those people. It has nothing to do with the deity. It has nothing to do with who you follow. But later down the road, if you break that load of vengeance and you save them, like let's say you could kill all the people that burnt down your village and you don't, and then you enslave them, you might go back to the oath of revenge instead of the oath of vengeance, right? There could be a different oath that you would be under, but it wouldn't be a person.
Where would you say the power comes from?
This is why I don't typically like oaths in terms of paladinhood. I understand why they did it. I think it was a move to make it more PC, because you still had clerics which were religious, but I see kind of why they wanted to maybe give people a higher level fighter, but not a divine level one. I personally don't know why they changed from divine to oath. It's not a change that I particularly was on board with.
Yeah, I always thought it was a combination.
I like the idea of oaths because I like that it expands the idea of what a paladin can be all about. But I also look at it from the point of view of kind of like how we've talked about in mantles. So actually, you'll appreciate this one. So here's how I describe oaths. If you remember in the Apprentice Adept series, when there's been a couple moments that this happened, both with the main character and his and the Lady Blue, with the Blue Adept and his lady, it happened, and it also happened with the Blue Adept and Nasa. But there were several times where he made an oath, and the words that he spoke, remember, he would describe it as an invisible force rippled out from him, and it actually made everything, like, as it rippled out, things like shined, and they could see the burst of magic because of the words he said. It happened when the Lady Blue and Blue got married, because they said the 3 times, and that was an oath of love. It also happened when he made an oath to Nasa and basically said, like, we're friends forever. Remember, that one was so big, that's why all of the herds are now friends. Remember that moment in juxtaposition when he made that oath of we're friends and no matter what happens, that's never going to stop. But that oath was so powerful. The werewolves, the unicorns, the bats, they're all friends now because of his oath to her. They all got affected by an AoE. That is what I now imagine as 5th edition's oaths. It is a moment that is so powerful, so emotional, that you literally rip through the fabrics and kind of, in a sense, create your own mantle. Your oath is basically saying that it is, instead of you and a deity, it's basically you make an agreement with the universe, with the power, the weave itself. You're basically saying, weave, you give me the power to fulfill this, and I will be your outlet for this. Like we've talked about that before, like the outlet, right? If you want to be an oath of vengeance, you're basically telling the weave itself, I'm going to be an outlet for the universal need for vengeance, right? That the universal out there, right? So I want to be that small outlet. We talked about this in a previous episode about how when you dam up power, the water has to go somewhere. And that's how mantles work, is you dam up enough power, okay, water finds an outlet. I would say lore-wise, an oath is you saying, I'm not a god, I'm not a large body of water, but I need this power and you need an outlet. Let me be one of those outlets. And kind of like how water has natural streams that just pop up out of nowhere, this would be the weave being like, I grant you the ability to do that.
I'm tracking with you so far. My question is this, because I know for you specifically, when you think about your pantheon, like, there are all types of gods, and there are gods of all things, and those things need to be, what's the right word, managed well, and that's kind of like the role of these gods to do such a thing. And
correct.
So, like, I would imagine that there is a god of love. I would imagine that there's a god of vengeance. I would imagine that there's a god of friendship, or whatever the case may be. So any paladin that makes an oath to one of these things, say they make an oath to vengeance, or whatever the case may be, what would you say what would you say, if any, is a connection between that paladin's oath and the god of that thing that they made an oath to?
Typically none. And the reason why I say that is because according to that god, that god has a sphere of influence, right? Let's say the god of vengeance. He has a sphere of influence. His whole purpose is to keep vengeance in balance and to do a bunch of other stuff in that vein. Some random person claiming, I'm going to get vengeance, means nothing to him. Yes, it is part of his thing. He wants people, like, he wants some random person who's not a follower. He wants the world. He wants anyone in the world to have vengeance. That keeps him alive, right? Any act of vengeance is in his sphere. But some random person saying, I'm going to get vengeance, is no more important to him than anybody else doing anything else, because it's not in his name. They're not getting vengeance in his name. So to that god, you're just another person.
They make an oath that they can draw power from the weave.
But that's the thing, is the oath is not to the god. See, a god only cares, like the way I look at it, like in my pantheon, I don't care, like a god does not care about a follower. Like I will grant you certain things if you follow me, and eventually a followerhood could gain my attention, right? But the followership is you believe in my teachings and you will go and do those, and in return I have made paladins and clerics to protect you and to service you, right? I don't do anything with my followers, but I have churches for that. You follow my church, you help my church, you help my clerics, which is where my power comes from. Clerics are my instruments, right? Paladins are also my instruments. They are people who said, I am going to serve you. I am here to represent your name, and that is a contract. I have said, fine, I trust that you will be my representative. Here's the rules that you must follow. Here's the powers I will give you. That is an exchange. Some other person saying, I want to get vengeance and I want the power for vengeance could come to me and say, I want that power. We can make a deal. He could become a warlock. We can make a deal. He could become a paladin. We can make a deal and he could just become an enhanced, something else that I have in my realm, just an enhanced individual that made a contract with the deity. It's like basically it's like a warlock, but not the class. It's like a one-off. You know, it's like, hey, you made a deal, you get power, but you're not the class of warlock. You're just having like I want to be able to do this spell kind of thing, right? It's more one-off deals. But those are things that you can do with deities. But just by tapping into his sphere of influence, he could technically, as the god, if he doesn't like what you're doing with it, he could cut it off. Like he could cut you off from some of that if it dips into his area. But even though it's his sphere of influence and he's responsible for it and he controls it, it's not like every last little thing is his conscious doing, right? Like the energies flow naturally. He's there to make sure they flow and properly and no one's doing anything wrong. But just because he's the god of vengeance doesn't mean that every last little thing that is responsible for vengeance, he had a hand in. He's just making sure that the rivers flow, no one's damming it up, no one's lighting the forest up. Like, he's the caretaker, right? He's there watching the grounds. He's there making sure everything works, and he's making decisions. If someone says, hey, I want to build a bridge, he says, hey, build the bridge 400 feet over that way, but you're good. Someone says, hey, I want to build a dam, be like, okay, but we need an extra stream over here. He'll coordinate everything, but someone's saying, hey, I want to set up shop over here, and I want to take a little bit of your river, as long as it's not disrupting the whole property, he doesn't care what that one little guy's doing. Some guy fishing on his land doesn't bother him. It's when a bunch of people want to come fish and take his, and take all of his resources or poison his waters, right? That's when he needs to get involved. So that's how I would describe an oath maker, like an oath paladin, not being directly tied to the divine, because he didn't ask the divine for anything. He just wanted to make an oath and said, I am going to do this, and a higher force, not necessarily the divine, but some higher force, whether it be the weave, whether it be, maybe it is that god, or in my pantheon, you could even do it this way, because there's the god of vengeance, but he also has underlings, right? He has lesser gods, demigods that all have their own influence. What if this paladin, you could say this paladin wants to make an oath. He's not here to make an oath with the deity, so the deity doesn't care about him, but he is asking for this access to power. Maybe there's a god, maybe a demigod, who that's his job. Maybe the god's like, look, if no one wants to be my paladin, I don't care. But if they want to use my magic, if they want to use my sphere of influence, obviously I want that to be spread. So if anyone's not willing to be a paladin, you demigod, that's your job now. Anybody asking for my power, you go decide. Because if they're not being my paladin, I don't care about them. But if they want to use and spread my word, hell yeah. Let that guy go into some other foreign country and spread vengeance. That I don't have a foothold there, because that's a god's mentality, right? If he goes and spreads vengeance and then someone wants to become a paladin or a cleric of the god of vengeance, guess what? Now he has a foothold. But if this guy's not going to do anything for the deity and for the religion, he could just assign one of his lesser gods to be like, hey, if anybody wants this power, give them what you think they need in order to do what I need. So that's another way of doing it.
Would you say it's theoretically possible for someone to do both, in the sense that, hey, I want to be a paladin in class, but I also want to be a paladin of this god, right? So say if I choose the Oath of Conquest and I want to get involved with the god of conquest, I can go to the god of conquest and say, I swear X, Y, and Z oath to you,
so
to
in
be your paladin of conquest.
So in High Point, what I would do is, because again, High Point, I try to accept as much of what D&D puts out. I'm not particular to oaths, but if I had a player who was like, look, I really just don't want to be beholden to a god, I don't care, I want to be a paladin and I want to have these powers, I would probably let them have an oath. And like I said, I would probably attribute it, depending on what oath it is, either a lesser of the gods granted them power by proxy, or it was the weave itself. That's how I would do it. But if you were an oath of vengeance and wanted to become a paladin of the god of vengeance, most likely, especially with how the paladin is basically the same thing, it wouldn't be much different mechanically. Like, it would be the same thing. You'd still be a paladin of that deity, but your duties would shift. Instead of being an oath and having all those powers, you'd be the paladin, which means you now have responsibilities towards that deity, but you'd probably narratively get a whole lot more, right? Now you have access to the churches. Now you have authority within the churches and against clerics. Now you have the god to call. You are now his right-hand mortal. Like, as a paladin, a cleric can pray like a follower can pray, and it's a one-way. A cleric can pray and hope to get a response. Paladins are kind of basically like the red phone. Like, if you're calling your god outside of a regular prayer, the god's probably going to be like, what do you want, bud? Like, you're there for, like, it's that whole thing. So if you were just an oath and you wanted his attention and you did something and you're like, I want to be your, I don't want to just be a paladin of your thought. I want to be your paladin. I would totally let that happen in D&D or in High Point. I don't think a lot mechanically would change, because they basically work the same. Now, granted, I may change it to where if you're an oath, you'd get 5th edition mechanics, and if you became a full paladin, it may revert to 2nd edition mechanics with some blend. But I don't see the difference as in they're two different things mechanically, right? But I do see them as in-game narratively, the god would pay much more attention to you. And again, you'd get cool stuff like as a oath paladin, you may be recognized by a church. Like if you went to the Church of Vengeance and you're like, I've taken the oath of vengeance, I am here for you. The church might benefit you. They might give you a free night in board, unlike a regular follower. They might treat you nicer. They may help you and assist you on your quest, but you're not one of them. But if you're a paladin, if you became a full paladin,
have authority in any sense.
But yeah, you walk into a church as a paladin, they're basically waiting on you hand and foot. They're like, what do you need? Here's your private room already. Like, you didn't even know you had a private room, but they're like, here's your private room. Here's your free refill of holy water. How many do you normally carry on you? Like, that would how I would represent it is if you're just an oath taker, you're going to get the paladin abilities because that's just how it works. But if you want to be a paladin of a deity, you are going to get a lot more benefits, even if they don't show up mechanically. You may not have any more spells, you may not have any more feats, but you are going to be fundamentally different, respectively, in game.
It's a very, very small tangent. Very small tangent. I recently started watching an anime called Delicious in Dungeon, and there was an episode where they created a version of holy water that they put in this jar.
Keep talking, I gotta walk away, but keep talking.
Okay. And they swung it around, and they would swing it like through ghosts and stuff, and it would actually act as holy water to these spectral undead beings. But it wouldn't actually like break the jar, and it wouldn't actually expend the holy water. So the question is, how would you rule that? How would you rule it if somebody was like taking a bunch of holy water and just wanting to use it almost like a flail? Of sorts as a weapon against the undead, or specifically spectral things that have an incorporeal form, because the idea would be similar to coded weapons.
I see where you're going with it. The problem that I have is okay, so here's the problem that I have with that, right? It's how do you judge what's like touching the creature? Because typically what I think of is like when you slash through like an incorporeal creature, right? The idea is one of two things you envision. Either it physically passes through them, or you have the idea where like their body splits open, like you actually like cut them, but it's it's incorporeal goo and it goes back together. So if it's the latter, if you imagine it as it goes through their body splits apart and it goes through, the holy water never touches them, right? The bottle is physically moving their material out of the way. That's how I would adjust it as well. I would assume that even if it went through them physically, even if you looked at it in a gaseous form, the gas, here's the thing, it's like, okay, either you're ruling it that it's going through them, they're not going through it. So this is ruling number one. I have a bottle. I stick it inside of an incorporeal form, a gaseous form. Well, ruling one is that, yes, the bottle is inside the gaseous form, but the gaseous form is not inside the bottle, right? The gaseous form is around the bottle, so it's not coming in contact with the thing. Now, you could say, well, gaseous form and plasma form and all of that can walk through material. So then the second question is okay, maybe the gas is also inside. But then the question is that passing through material always? Or is it chosen? Like, you know what I mean? Like, does it always happen? Anything that touches them, they're also inside of? Or is it they have to choose to pass through a certain material? So if you shove the flask inside of them, do they naturally go inside the flask? Or do they have to choose to pass through it versus going around it? So that's another thing you have to think of. And then if you think of, okay, no matter what, let's just say no matter what, they go through whatever matter it is. So I have a flask with holy water inside, and I put it inside of their physical, whatever it is, and they now have passed through that bottle. That little tiny bit that is touching them is going to hurt them, if that's the ruling. But only that little bit. So if you have a whole vial and it's supposed to do a certain amount of damage, but you're not touching them with all of it, you're only being able to damage that little tiny part that's touching them, right? The little tiny gas that's inside the bottle is also touching the thing. So it to me, it's like it would do less damage, and I don't think I would allow that, because then if it is touching them, I would assume that there's a reaction. That's why it hurts them. So therefore, it would have to either expend or it would have to modify the holy water. So basically, I would not rule it that this is an unlimited use of holy water. I don't like it because there's too many variables here. You're basically saying that if you have a closed vial and you put it through something incorporeal, you have to assume that not only does it go through the incorporeal form, but the incorporeal form automatically penetrates into the vial. And that little tiny contact with however much gas or incorporealness inside, think about how full the vial is already. So you're telling me that that little tiny contact is doing the maximum amount of damage and not using up any of the holy water. It's not bursting in flames, or it's not going into steam. Because again, if you throw holy water on an incorporeal form, are you saying that the droplets just pass right through, do the damage, but then spud on the floor just in puddles? Does that mean I could take an incorporeal form and throw it on the ground somehow and continue to hold it? No, you would imagine, at least I do, that when water, like holy water hits, it does the whole gas off. It boils. I imagine that holy water is consumed when it's used against evil. Because if it's not, then I could literally be covered in tubes that are filled with holy water and literally just walk through ghosts and they would die. You know what I mean? Like, these are the things where it's like, I think that the holy water...
Logic, if there were a bunch of ghosts and theoretically there was a pool of holy water and you sent ghost after ghost after ghost after ghost into this pool of holy water, eventually that pool of holy water would be empty.
I 100% believe that. That is how I would rule it. I would 100% rule that, because otherwise, why isn't every church surrounded by a moat of holy water that will never be taken over by any undead ever again? Why isn't every undead cell immediately surrounded or somehow encased in holy water? Like, it makes holy water too powerful, in my opinion, because not having it used up just makes that means that, yes, it's a cool concept, but what I would do is I would go one step further and make it to where, like, yeah, you have to replace that flail. Like, you have to refill it every few hits. Like, that makes it, to me, you can make it a super powerful flail, but also have special abilities when full. You know what I mean? And it could just be something simple as when you flail it, you know how, like, you take like a water bottle and you poke like 2 holes at the top and then you squeeze it, it like fans out. Why not just do that? Make a special vial so where whenever you fling it, it just kind of sprays out, or only on contact. When it like makes contact with something, it like just gushes out liquid. That way it's like an AoE and you have a usage of it. But just saying it's in a vial and that vial is enough, I don't buy it. That I just don't buy it.
For an alternative to, similar to how rogues can coat their blades in poison to do poison damage when they do an attack. Say if I coated a sword in holy water for an attack to make it basically, and it would probably only be good for a number of attacks or something like that.
Typically dips are only good for one attack, so I would probably rule it as a single attack.
Really? Even for, they don't have like a couple of like
no, usually it's a single use. Usually, I know old school rules it was a single use. I don't think 5th edition changed it. We'll have to double check that.
I'm not sure. Anyway, that was a tangent. Just a quick question. We were talking about
but good point though is being able to adjust on that. And yeah, it's like, it's a cool idea. I really do like people playing with it, but it basically, once you build something and have an idea like that, once you cross that line into making it infinite, that's where I start to have problems with it, right? Because at that point, one vial of holy water will kill every undead in existence. I don't buy it. Sorry. I can't accept that one vial of holy water is enough to kill every ghost in existence. That's not, that is in no way balanced in my opinion. Because that's what you're saying, is if this is true, that means that you can literally, if infinite...
It loses its potency after a while. It would yes, it starts off as holy water, but over time it becomes normal water because all the holiness has been expended into these
things. It's either
that
or like I said, if you're allowing a sealed container to do that damage, I would say that every time you do it, you either lose or change a little bit of the holy water. Like, it becomes corrupted, and eventually it's just not holy water anymore. It's, corrupted water or whatever. Ooh, that would be a unique one, though. If you had an item that did that, where if you filled it with holy water, it would do damage to, like, undead and ghosts, but every time it did damage, it would, like, corrupt, and then if it got too corrupted, it would start healing them. So like it would start casting harm instead of heal, kind of thing. Like that would just be really interesting if it started like, literally, if it got infected, you would have to like cleanse it, and and it wouldn't just be empty it out. It would have to be this whole process, because if you emptied it out, the corruption would corrupt the land that it landed on, so it would be like toxic water. So you'd have to go either purify it, or you'd have to like, kind of like how we have like recycling. You have to figure out how to dispose of it, and then go get a new vial of holy water to install.
Just start
That would be a really
using
interesting
it on
narrative.
divine creatures instead. Imagine
Oh,
using
I wonder.
if you started using it on like angels or some other like divine beings or something like that. Be
Oh
like,
man,
"Hey, I got
imagine the
this."
balance act of that. Dude, imagine a weapon that literally had, like, when upon its creation, it had a perfectly sealed amount of holy water that is perfectly sealed, right? Can never go away. So imagine a weapon that does that, where it's a weapon of balance. Oh, this could be for a god of neutrality, to where, yes, the more you use it against evil, the more it corrupts. Then it becomes more powerful against good creatures, but the more good creatures it takes down, the better it becomes, which then it goes back to being good against evil creatures. So literally, it's just a weapon that whoever it's used against most, it becomes weakest against. And then it flips. And then just like, imagine a god of balance throwing that in the world, just to let the tides constantly shift from good to evil.
I like that.
Because eventually the evil people have it, right? And it's really good against the good guys, until one day it's useless, and if not beneficial to the good guys, to where they can take it, and then they're in the rule. Until to one day it's too much.
I'd be very curious if like see where that weapon like travels. Like imagine like some holy avenger got a hold of it and like used it for the majority of his journey, and then he realized, oh, this is not doing me any good anymore. Would they just drop it, leave it in a dungeon for somebody else to find?
Right.
Or would they like take it and steal it away
I'm thinking
somewhere
like
so nobody else could use it?
most likely after a couple cycles, what I would probably have, if it existed in High Point, where it would probably exist now, it would probably be on the good side of things, but it would be stored away. Eventually, what I think would have happened is, after enough back and forth cycles, the good guys would have been like, because the bad guys are always going to be greedy about it and always want it for power. I think the good guys would have eventually fought for it, let it get, to the point to where it's really good for them. Get it back to almost at its peak, right? To where it's almost not getting any more power. Like almost throw some good guys at it to let it get more powerful against the bad guys. Took it back.
That's what I'm saying.
Took it back and then refused to use it again. The good guys took it and locked it away and said, no, that no matter how bad it gets, we will always hold this from here on out. And that's where it will be right now, because in their mindset, it's the idea that we can never let it shift again, because if we start to use it, it starts to shift. And if it shifts, we go into a dark age. So what I would do lore-wise is, it's probably a hidden item somewhere, and all of that. So yeah, I think that's what I would do. I actually think that I would go that route of have the good guys hold on to it and be trying to never use it. And it's been going for a long time, but that would be a cool concept of like a narrative of someone stole it. Now you have to go figure it out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took care of the advertisement.
Yeah.
Gotta love the advertisement bots.
I feel like if the bad guys ever got a hold of it, they would use it against good for as long as they could, and then they would have like a group of bad guys just lined up to use it against, just to turn it back to be valuable against good. And so they would sacrifice their own people just to get it on the evil side again, so they could keep using it. You know what I mean? Just like keep recycling it. So
but maybe, but see, no, that's what you do, is you tie it into intent. So you can't just kill evil with it. It has to be good killing evil. If evil kills evil, it knows. Like there would have to be because it's a true weapon of balance. You know what I mean? It would have to be designed to where if evil kills evil, it actually works against them. Like it like evil can't it has to be good versus evil, evil versus good.
Interesting. So what if somebody who is true neutral actually wielded it? Could they wield it no matter what?
Oh. Well, so that would be the lore. The intent is for someone who's true neutral to wield it until it becomes neutral. Oh, here would be an interesting one is what if there's like a secret to it where once you get it to be perfectly balanced again, if you can, like it's a time frame. Once it becomes perfectly in the middle, like a timer starts, and if it lasts long enough as neutral, with minor deviations here and there, it like manifests into like its ultimate form. And what I would probably do is like its ultimate form unlocks, it calls the god that owns it, and basically you've completed the quest, you get one free wish, like a divine level, anything you want, and then it gets sent off somewhere. Like basically it's like, okay, cool, thanks, I'm gonna send it off and it's gonna restart. But the whole point is to like the gift of neutrality. It's if you can find this and become neutral with it and stay neutral and not be corrupted by the shift in power, you can get a free wish. But the god of neutrality needs this thing to exist and let it do its natural thing. So it's like, hey, you get your wish, that goes back out into the masses. That's probably what I would do. But I do like the idea that, yeah, the idea of someone who's true neutral, that's who it's intended for. It's intended to be held by someone who's true neutral, and if held long enough, they're the ones that are granted. Because that's the idea, right? You gave the good and the bad guys an option. You gave them the chance to a free wish. They could have annihilated each other with that one wish, but you knew that they would never be able to. The good guys can never let it balance out because it's not good to use it, and the evil guys will always be too greedy that neither side will allow it to be balanced. But a true neutral person, they can attack both good and bad people, and it will balance properly. An evil person can only attack good. A good person can only attack evil. So that means that it was intended to make people work together. It was intended for good and evil to work together, but neither will to make it truly balanced to get the wish. So only someone who's true neutral, who can understand how to balance it out, they're the only ones who get the wish, because they're the only ones who can be trusted to make a wish that is of a neutral basis.
Very interesting.
That exists in High Point now. I'm going to have to figure out what type of weapon that is, but that exists in High Point now. There is a true neutral weapon. Actually, I actually have something. No, because that's well, actually. So Zenith has a staff that is out in the world. Typically, this staff is broken into multiple pieces, and then when you get all the pieces together, you can summon him for a wish. I was thinking about what if that should be his, because he's true neutral, but I don't know if he would go about that. I'm gonna have to think on that. I don't know if it would be Zenith's weapon or not.
Okay. And if it's a staff, Dobbs needs to know where it's at.
Interesting. I like that. I like this idea. I love when we can create live. I love when we actually have like creation live on chat. It's great.
Lightweight tangent, but whatever, it's fine.
So we were talking about Oathbreaker. Oh yeah, we were still on Oathbreakers originally. So this one, the last thing we said was that when they break their oath, you basically become a different type of paladin. Now, here's an interesting note that I did find. So also in 5th edition, there are some notes like in the DMG that talk about handling paladins breaking their oaths or acting against a deity's wishes. So they do make a small note that if it's a deity involved, it's up to the Dungeon Master's discretion, which allows for more narrative flexibility and character development. So this is kind of exactly what you and I were talking about, where there isn't it's mainly based on oaths, but they still have a small note somewhere in the DMG that says, if this is still faith-based, go one extra step.
They do talk about divine stuff a lot in the Paladin class.
And it's probably just because divine as in holier than thou. I think it's also a remnant of the history. But yeah, they definitely still know that this is still heavy on the potential deity side. So at least like they say that, it's under the DM's discretion, if you want it to be bigger of a deal, which is why I say, like, for me, yeah, you could totally be a paladin or an oath paladin, but being a paladin of a god will grant you some more narrative bonuses. And I think that's what they intend it to be. And then the last part. So the last bit that we'll end you guys with here, for those of you who are still with us, we are going to end with just a couple little interesting historical aspects for the other classes that have potential access issues. So, starting with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, both in first and second edition, divine connections. So, clerics deriving their powers from their deities could have their powers removed. So, not just like what we talked about before, where spellcasting was involved or interrupted, but technically, if straying too far from the alignment or the teachings or the duties that were set to you by your deity, there were rules as written options for clerics to lose their clerichood, and they would, just like a paladin, lose all of their divine abilities without atonement. And even had similar to paladins, you could seek atonement by going some sort of quest, and then you would get your powers powers back through this quest. But yes, I was kind of surprised that clerics had an official rule set of being able to lose their power.
Very nice.
Also in AD&D first and second edition, this is the one that I think is the one that surprised me the most. Like, I didn't realize, like, I always figured clerics could lose it. It was, again, just kind of like a paladin thing. You wouldn't, because that's not how you play a cleric. But I was like, okay, it makes sense. Piss off your god, they could take it from you. This is one I didn't know at all. Never even would have thought that this had a rule set for it. But in first and second edition, druids could lose their power. It's called Nature's Balance. And druids were required.
I expected that.
Yeah, so essentially second edition and earlier, because it was much more nature based than we see now. You were really required to maintain that balance with nature, and in fact, druids were intended originally in first and second edition. They were required to be neutral, so they also had alignment requirements. You were required to be neutral about it. So not only did you have to protect nature and the balance of nature, but you also just had to protect the balance of all things. So you were intended to be neutral. If you shifted away from neutrality, you would be able to you would lose your spellcasting abilities and your druidic powers. And then there was a hierarchical system. So druids had a hierarchical structure where only a limited number of high-level druids could exist. So I don't know if this is still in 5th edition, but early on, the idea is that you could technically only advance so far until you found another druid to teach you. Like, the idea that there only could be so many druids of a high level. So this was just an in-game, like, a story option. So losing a challenge for rank could technically result in losing status but not power. So if you were trying to be a higher status, or if you were a higher status and someone challenged you, you could lose the hierarchy of it. You wouldn't lose your powers, but you would technically lose, like, a hierarchy within druids. So unique little thing there.
Because druids are one of my favorite classes. I think about, like, how they play out a lot, and I love the idea that, and this is again, like I said at the beginning of the stream, like, I have my own ideas of, like, what would happen with certain classes, like, lose their powers and how it would go down. And for me, my mindset for druids is, like, your job is to care for nature, right? And just like there's a bunch of different types of paladins and a bunch of different types of clerics, there's a bunch of different types of druids, you know? Some are more about plants, some are more about animals, some are more about nature in general, some are more about, just like healing and like the circle of life type deal, which is not necessarily like plants and animals and stuff, but just the overall cycle of things. And any druid that tries to break that, and I do mean break that, because there are a lot of, like, undead druids. There are druids of fire, but all of that is necessary for the true balance, right? So, imagine, like, from my perspective, it's okay to have an evil druid, right? They're just one aspect of,
as long as the balance is maintained. And that's what I look at it. It's more about the balance of what they hold dear, and not so much the balance of new. That's why I like the idea. Like, I love alignment, but I understand why less and less was dependent upon alignment.
But my biggest thing is, like, okay, say if I am a druid of undeath or something like that, and I fall in love with somebody, and I do everything in my power to prevent them from completing their cycle.
Right.
prevent them from dying. Like that, in my mind, would be something that druid would lose their powers for.
Yeah, no, yeah, because
Right.
you're disrupting the cycle for
And
personal gain, just like a
same
paladin
thing.
who did something for themselves and not for the greater good.
Same thing if there was a druid, like a fire druid, right? A lot of times fire is necessary to like cleanse certain things and pave the way for rebirth, right? But say there was a druid who their home was due to get destroyed or leveled or burned, and they did everything in their power to stop that from happening. Same thing would happen. So it's
Yeah.
almost like it's very similar to the paladin mindset where you're like breaking your oath, you're breaking like why you are what
But
you
it's your,
are for.
you could just look at it as druids just have a pact with nature. They have a bond with nature, and nature will sever that bond if you don't have its best interest, right? Whatever connection to nature, whether it's the forest, the leaves, the fire. But yeah, it's just more of a, if you look at each of these as a different way to interact with the weave, this one is just more of a close relationship that you can tarnish, right? It's an emotional relationship that you can tarnish instead of a contractual one.
And so the other aspect, and I think you're eventually going to get to it when we talk about warlocks. But one of my biggest things is because we already talked a little bit about how you get it back with paladins, but like when it comes to what do you do then, like as a player, if I have decided, or if I have broken my oath, or if I have gone away from whatever, there might be a way of redemption to come back to that same path of druid, but also you could and the way I think about it is because nature has so many different sides, you could theoretically just make a pact or a bond with a different aspect of nature, right? So if I was a fire druid, maybe I become a water druid or somebody or a plant druid who protects, plants and things of that nature, and my grove becomes, my first sanctuary, the one that I saved, even though I severed it here. Now, what type? I do still believe that there should be some sort of like you said with the paladin, some sort of like quest you go on to find a way back, to find what you're actually about now, because I'm assuming you went against this because you had some significant change in who and what you desired to be. I was a necromancy druid, I was an undead druid, but now I found a reason to value life more than I had before. And so even though I broke that connection, there is an element of nature that requires life. And so even though I'm not doing it here anymore, I might be able to find another place to do it. So I don't know. I find that types of stuff interesting, different ways to go about that. But I am surprised that there's actually a rule set for that in Druids.
Yeah,
But
only
I'm
up
glad.
until second edition though. They got rid of it in third and beyond, so it's only a second edition,
sure.
up to second edition. Also, this one really surprised me. I'm not surprised. This one was only in first edition, so they got rid of this one quite quickly. But this one I think is going to be the biggest surprise to you, because for me it's like if there was any class outside of rogue or fighter, right? If there was any class that I would think couldn't lose their stuff, from an outside force, I thought it was going to be this one. So it kind of struck me as a little bit interesting that they thought this could be taken away, not by your own choice. But in first edition, monks could lose their abilities. Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even
That
know
was.
you had monks in first edition.
So at first off, monks in first edition required to be lawful alignment. Didn't have to be good, but they had to be lawful. So you did have an alignment requirement that if you breached out of your alignment, you'd lose it. Deviating from any of your lawful alignments or failing to adhere to their monastic order, so wherever your monastery was, whatever the order, kind of like clerics. If you basically went against your teachings, you would actually be able to lose your monk abilities. And then similar to druids, they had a hierarchy, so even monks originally only had so many people at the top that that could basically hold certain titles in certain positions. So kind of like the druids, yeah, if you went too far off, you could essentially lose your monkhood, which I find really interesting, because other than losing, I would imagine today, in 5th edition, you would say more or less you lost your you lost your balance, your internal balance. You lost the connection with yourself. But this is very interesting that they based it off of alignment. I think that's why it didn't last beyond first edition, because monk and alignment, the monks aren't granted something because they went to a monastery. They learned something, right? It's almost like you'd have to break a connection with yourself.
And we talked about this the other day when it comes to the mindset behind monks, and I genuinely feel like monks are much better described as martial artists than they are as monks, right?
Yeah.
Because it's more than just being able to, meditate and be quiet, but like it's a whole. But I do get the idea of like, because imagine like tapping into like your key, and tapping into this internal ability, like. I see a lot in like superhero movies or animes where
You lose
people
doubt
get
in
blocked
yourself, you
from
lose
their
confidence.
powers. Yes, you get blocked from.
I can
from
understand a
from
story arc with it, but as a mechanic, it's very loose. Like I can
very
understand
so,
it from the
very
story
much so.
arc and from a narrative, but this is just. I'm glad they got rid of it. Same thing with this next one too.
Yeah, for
Also,
sure.
also in first edition, assassin was also alignment based. If you didn't stay evil, you'd lose your ability to be an assassin. Doesn't make any sense. So again, these are things first edition got rid of. I'm glad they got rid of it because it doesn't long term
Alright,
make any
alright.
sense.
That is crazy. I'm very surprised at that.
In third edition, we had the Blackguard, also known as the Anti-Paladin. What in High Point I call the Avenger. Now,
Okay.
Blackguards were required to be evil, so they were the counterpart of Paladins. They are essentially fallen paladins or characters who serve dark powers and must maintain an evil alignment. So I guess this was also an alternative in third edition to if you became a fallen paladin, instead of being redeemed, you could just go full Blackguard.
So it's their version of Oathbreaker. Okay.
Yeah. And if they deviated from the evil path, they would lose their Blackguard abilities. However, unlike Paladins, the Blackguard had a different type of redemption.
You just had to go slaughter a village. That's all.
Oh no, so unlike Paladins, redemption for Blackguards would typically mean abandoning their Blackguard status. So like in order to redeem, they basically had to step away from whatever they were previously and possibly convert to another class, like a Paladin through roleplay and atonement. So it's like a Paladin could either reatone and go back to what they were, or maybe go into a Blackguard. But their idea was if you were a Blackguard and you failed, it was a lot harder and not so much as easy to go back to the last person. Because again, if you're evil, serving someone who's evil, why are they going to forgive you? Like, that's not a very evil thing to do, and you're good now. They can't trust that you're going to stay evil again. So it kind of makes sense that for this one, you could continue to go good and try to become a regular paladin, or you just have to choose a whole different class because you're no longer worthy to be an evil paladin. So it's almost like this one was a little bit worse than a regular paladin, right? It's actually a little bit harsher.
Yeah.
I kind of like that though.
That's crazy.
Like narrative wise though, again, why would an evil god forgive you? Like
Yeah, it's fair. That's very
straight
fair.
up. Oh man, especially if you were against the god against grudges, like just the ability for them to laugh at you for even thinking of it. Okay,
Wow.
and then here we go back to the one that you had mentioned before. So in third edition and fifth edition, so this is only 3.5 to be specific. So 3.5 and fifth edition pulled from this. Now we got to the Warlock. So in this particular case, pact with your patron. The Warlock's divine power comes with the pact, and of course, breaching that contract could lose your powers, violating the terms of the pact, betraying your patron, or going against anything that your patron would have asked you to do would lose your abilities. Repercussions would include the exact consequences. Okay. So repercussions for this would be determined typically by the DM. So it's a very narrative driven. There's not like a lot of hard set rules. But it's anything from losing your powers to actually gaining curses, all the way up to needing to do a quest for redemption. And that could be anything from losing your powers temporarily to powers not working properly, to not working when you want them to work. Basically, it's the warlock or it's the patron fucking with you, right? It's a lot less strict. You're done. The patron's like, look, I know you're human. Like, you're human. Of course you're not perfect. Like, you're not me. So I'm gonna have fun with this because I still need you. But you're not so like off the mark that I'm just gonna like, you know what I mean? It's not like that high of a standard like a paladin, right? You made a deal.
Right.
You broke the contract, but I still want my end of the contract. So instead of breaking the whole deal, I'm just gonna punish you and get a little bit of enjoyment out of it for me, right? So kind of a lesser concern, but I like that, again, it's more from the patron's point of view and not just a hard mechanic. I like that each patron can have a much different approach, right? You could have a super lawful good patron who's just like, no, we're done, never again, get out of my sight, I never want to see you again. But you could have like a trickster, like a demon, who's like, oh, you thought you could get one up on me, okay, bud, let me just show you why you never will do that again. And then you could just spend the next gaming session or two just messing with that player, and then you'd be like, okay, go back to playing. Just don't ever do that again, right? Like, that's what a patron, I feel, would do over a deity. A patron would have fun. They would toy with you, and they would make sure you knew never to do it again, where a god would just cut you loose, because guess what? I don't need you. Like, I have so many other things to do. You're not even on my list of entertainment.
When you view warlocks, do you view their patrons as somebody who has unlimited access to their subordinate?
Most of the time, yes. It's usually in the contract. It's usually in the contract that, kind of like how you and Safia, or Alo and Safia, have that permanent connection due to background. It's along the same lines as that. Your contract basically grants them 100% access to everything. Now, granted, if you're savvy and smart and you role-played like nobody does, if you role-played your pact, you might be able to work in something. But for the most part, if you're just a warlock, my lore, if you aren't doing your own pact, it's absolutely written in there that they have absolutely all access to everything. Like, essentially, the patron can strip you naked at any point if they want to. They have, with you specifically, they have all access of a god. If you didn't negotiate your own contract, I basically put it that part of the deal is that patron can basically treat you like a god can treat a follower. You gave them access to your location, the stuff you have on you. If you die, all your stuff is technically forfeit to them if they so choose. And that's just all for narrative purposes. Like, if you die with an important object, another player can steal it. But the idea is that, yes, you've given up all of your worldly freedoms to this patron.
My question becomes, like, because the concept of making a pact with multiple patrons, obviously it's dangerous, obviously it's stupid,
to say the least, but yes.
But imagine now. Well, see,
is it doable?
Like
yes.
Are a you have a pact with some patron, right? Some shady patron, and you, for whatever reason, want to get out of it. And throughout your dealings with them, you find out who their natural enemy is. Somebody who really wants to screw them up, mess them up. And you find a way to contact that other entity and be like, yo, I'm currently underneath them. I really want to get out. If you help me get out, I will help you fuck them up. Like,
that's happened before. Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, not common, but
how realistic is being able to do? I mean, obviously you have to be creative. Obviously you have to, know what you're doing.
It's absolutely realistic. It's just, again, it all comes down to the circumstances of who the two deities or who the two creatures are. Again, the enemy could be a deity and the other could just be an immortal. Like, pacts don't have to be made with deities. They just have to be made with something that has more power than you, and that I can justify has enough power to do what warlocks can do mechanically, right? And sometimes immortals can't. Like
20th level.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, warlocks can become powerful enough to give out enough power to unique individuals. That's why you can have a non-deity, because they care more about you because they can't have as many of you, right? They don't have enough power to give 9 million clerics the same spell every day, but they might have enough power to give 12 very special people spells every day. So it's basically like that. So if you have a warlock, so again, if you're a warlock of an immortal and you go to a deity, Oh, absolutely. That deity is like, please, let me handle this. But let's say you have two entities of the same power level. It just kind of comes down to what kind of pact you're in. Because depending upon the deity that you're currently in a pact with, will depend on like the restrictions they have and what they could do to you if you go away from them. But yeah, a lot of the times you're gonna have permanent negatives, but you're also gonna have a lot more potential positives in narration, right? Like you'll be able to do it. Mechanically speaking, you'll be able to shift as one warlock type to another. However, spells will change, and you might get permanent negatives. Like on your way out, that warlock may fuck you up. Like he may not just take your power, but he may take something else as well. Like he may take part of your soul. He may take your eye. He may take the ability for you to use your hand, and therefore you can't cast magic. He may cripple you. He may,
The entity that Dobbs talking to right now, would he qualify as somebody powerful enough to be a patron? I know what he is
the person that he represents. That's very complicated. Okay, so the person he represents, yes and no. Like Blue is capable, but due to the anomaly, his granting of power doesn't work unless he's here. So while he resides in his home plane, he cannot be a patron to anybody here. His magic does not transition. Because of the deal and because of the uniqueness that happened early on in High Point, if and when he does visit, he does have power enough to do that. But he doesn't out of his own personal choices. But yeah, so if he were here, he could. Who you are speaking to specifically, not the representation, but actually who you're speaking to, there is enough power behind them, but they do not have access to use it like that.
That's kind of what I thought. That's kind of
like the power is there, but they would not be able to grant it out and use that power based on how they are where they are talking to you.
Okay. Just curious.
No, that's a great question. That's a fantastic question. And we have one final one before we let you all go. So thank you all for those who are still here. Hope you guys have been enjoying. But this is going to be our final entry for today. And I think this one is going to be not surprising, but I think this one's going to pique your interest just in general.
Wait, actually a spellcaster unlike Monk?
No, it's actually more like Monk than a spellcaster. And it's only going to pique your interest, Kage, just because of your personal interests with your own homebrew. But in 1st and 3rd edition only, there was a supplemental called Oriental Adventures. And the class of Samurai was also able to be lost. You had a code of honor. Samurais were bound by a strict code of honor and duty, similar to paladins and clerics. They had a strict code of what they had to follow. Failing to uphold their code or committing dishonorable acts could result in them losing their status and abilities as a samurai. Seppuku. In some settings, dishonor could lead to the expectation of ritual suicide as atonement. Rules as written, you were supposed to actually not... legit, you were not allowed to break the rules of samurai. Straight up, you were not supposed to. Otherwise, everybody would expect you to be done.
I had not truly thought about that as because building the class, you have the Bushido code, you have all of the standard things that come with the honorability of being what a samurai is, but I had not thought about being a dishonor, because you watch all these shows.
You bring dishonor. How did you not think about bringing dishonor?
About how because think about it, when the samurai were starting to fade out and stop being the primary force that they were, they used to be the warriors, they used to be the army. of their land, and at a certain point in time they became obsolete. And so it's like, what do these people who have trained their entire life and dedicated to the sword do when we're entering into the world of guns, right? And so it's like they eventually had to find other ways to exist, and so they became Ronin, right? And so a lot of the times, like, I feel like that's almost it's very similar to like a fallen samurai would turn into a Ronin, like a fallen
You
paladin would
could.
turn into
Or
an
again, it could be
Oathbreaker.
narratively. Maybe it's a samurai who didn't break his code and become dishonored, but narratively speaking, fulfilled their duties and were let go. You know, like, hey, thanks, but we don't need you anymore. Or they
Yes.
failed and their master was killed and therefore they're free. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you could have a samurai class and even have a Ronin as either a narrative leader option or as similar to the anti-paladin or blackguard, a fallen samurai. Absolutely, I think that's true. That's why I wanted to bring that one up. I saw that one in the list. I was like, hey, I think
like
you'll
that a
like the
lot.
fact that
I like that a
there
lot.
was a samurai there. But yeah, I think that was a really fun topic. I think looking at the history of both how just spellcasting powers as well as just class powers have evolved, and it's unique to see which ones they decided to hold as like these weren't things you knew how to do, but these were things that you earned, right? Like, it's really interesting to see what classes they delineated, right? Fighters, rogues, all of, those were those are just things you learned how to do, right? You just learned how to wield a sword. No one could take that away from you. Just because you were an evil bastard doesn't mean you can't not swing a sword. So it was really interesting to find out which ones, like these ones that are, you are as much of a representation of your class as your class is a representation of what you can do, right? As a druid, it's not just manipulation of nature, but the balance of nature. As a samurai, it's about the code that you follow. About the paladin, it's about the oath you took, right? It's not just the things that you've learned how to do, but it's the right to know how to do them. And I think that's the key takeaway from when, for DMs out there, if you're interested in like how you can mess with your players or give them boundaries, give them limits, or even give them consequences. These are great examples of taking something that is standard, but making sure the players understand the difference between knowing something and earning it, like having the right to have it. So I think that's where these kind of balance out those scales. And yeah, I'm really happy with that. I think that was quite good.
I like it a lot. I really do. I think there are so many cool things with what we've gone over on how things go away, the ebbs and flows, and I think there's good base for people to be able to maintain what they are and not be afraid of it. I was actually just talking to one of my players yesterday, and one of the things that they told me is that they feel like they have been trying to make their characters too perfect
Yeah.
without any flaws, and it doesn't
I'm so
really
glad when a
breed for
character.
a lot of depth into.
I
I felt the exact
I
same
love when
way, the
players
exact
come to
same way.
that
But
conclusion on their own.
that mindset is so valuable, and what I think you can do with that is so phenomenal. And so when you start looking at things like breaking your oath or losing your paladin or you're losing your patron or whatever the case may be, like whatever it is, you stop looking at it as a detriment or a bad thing and looking at it more of this is just your journey for your character,
Exactly.
like not necessarily like doing things to be just spiteful, but like having a uh
Stop
just
looking at
a
everything as
heart
a
to
good or bad decision, because a lot of people look at
like.
most decisions as good or bad, right or wrong. And unfortunately, I know that's a lot of DMs out there kind of like play their games a little bit linear that way. But with character development, there's nothing out there telling you did right or wrong, right? It's only like all those people who say it's like that's not how you build that. It's like you're only saying that because you saw a build you liked better, right? That doesn't mean it's wrong. Like, there's so many ways to build these out that it's if you're narrating it correctly, there is no underpowered character, right? It's just how you narratively want to use it and how both you and the DM can bring it into the story and bring it into life. Because there are some people, there are some builds that, yes, the build itself is just going to give you so much to do. You look like you're an awesome badass, right? You have advantages on this and you have proficiencies in that and you have 9 different skill attacks and all of that. And you're just like, yeah, no matter what situation, I can do anything. It's like, but just because you can do all of that doesn't necessarily make you it makes you mechanically useful or versatile, but it doesn't make you good, because just because you can do all of those things doesn't mean you're adding to the story. You're just accomplishing the task or finishing the action, but you're not really lending to the story and to give it purpose and to give it life. You're just there to check the boxes, right? And I think that
Right.
these are those opportunities to see that, right? To see where can you take these moments and make them more about, not about, well, you did something wrong. Be like, well, you did something. What are you going to do with
Yes.
it, right? Like,
And I honestly feel the same way about character death. Like, I know a lot of players are just
Don't tell me
afraid
what
of
to
their
do.
characters dying. You know, it's like it's okay to have that kind of
holy
stuff
crap.
happen. You know?
Hello. 3 followers right out the gate. What is going on? What is up,
Well,
followers?
hello,
Hello.
friends.
We just got an explosion of
Oh my goodness.
big old
All the
explosion. What is up,
people.
y'all? GZ Rogue,
Hype
how's it
all day.
going? And Ready Pugless, don't tell me what to do. Well, we won't tell you what to do.
Live your life, my friends. Live your life.
Right? But yeah, no, I really do like the fact that, again, I think that doing this history dub, we also get to see the change over time with the priorities that Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons has had, right? The idea that we can see where the lore began, we can see where the inspirations started them, but I love seeing these changes, watching, almost being able to see it wasn't just like they thought they could do something better, but you could actually see how the community itself was reacting to it, right? Why we went from memorization to just preparation, right? How fundamentally they're the same, right? It's the same concept. It works the same way. I'm pre-choosing my spells, but when you change how the lore works, when you change how that manifests, right? Going from 15 minutes a level to just having the spells ready, it makes it a lot more approachable. And I love seeing that through all of the different classes and through the different editions, watching them not just change things and make them arbitrary, but watching how they individually fine-tune all of the pieces of D&D in order to make it more palatable for the general audience. And that's really what I'm all about there.
I'm here for it. I'm super here for it. No, it's way cool, and I love that we got to go down this rabbit hole and actually check out all of the different ways that this goes down. So, no, I'm here for it.
All right, I'm just gonna say though, Kage, if you can accept Dollar Store Kendrick Lamar, I will totally accept Dollar Store Thor.
Oh, I'm here for it. I love that. I will live the dollar store. Although I really wish the dollar store was actually still the dollar store. Now it's like the $1.50 store.
I know,
Whatever,
right?
it's fine.
So no joke, I was actually just there this morning because I bought all of the foil for the back room. So I literally bought like
Oh.
10 like I think
Nice.
about like 200 feet of foil just for the back room. Absolutely insane.
Do we just start
there's
echoing? I think we
oh
might.
no, why are we echoing, y'all? Hang on.
Yep.
Okay, so hold on a second. I'm just gonna talk. Is there any echo right now, y'all? Chat, let me know if there's any echo right now. It's just me on the mic. I want to see where the echo's coming from. If it's me or if it's there is echo right now. Okay. Give me a few seconds. I'm trying to figure out where this echo's coming from. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself real quick. I'm gonna let Kage talk and we'll see if he's the one.
Okay. Test. Check, check. Do you hear an echo? Do you hear an echo? Testing, testing. Check, check. You guys still hear the echo? Is it me, TV? Yeah, ooh, I heard that.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. That we are gonna have to figure out what's going on here. I cannot figure out in any of my settings why Kage would be echoing at this point. Yeah, I am so sorry for that, y'all. So I think we are just going to cut it there. We were at the end of our stream anyway, but it looks like we are definitely going to want to look into this before we continue with that. I will review the footage probably tomorrow, and I will try to see when the echo started and if I can nail down what happened. So sorry for that, guys. We do typically sometimes have some issues with the when he remotes in and all of that. So sorry for that. But we were getting to the end of our stream. We're already at the 3-hour mark. So I think that's going to be it due to technical difficulties. Sorry, we won't be able to hang out and chat with you guys. But thank you so much for everybody showing up, for the new follows. That's been fantastic. Rogue, thank you. Hype, thank you. Who else do we have? Skies Rub, thank you so much. Ready Pugless, thank you so much for joining up today, for following us. I hope you guys enjoyed whatever it is that you saw. I hope we do see you again. I know that we saw Freeman here earlier today as well. Cosmic showed up, which is awesome. Always love to see him as well. We will be back. I will be back on Monday. Kage will not be here, unfortunately. He won't even be remoting, so it's just going to be me. I will be doing a homebrew review of the Umbral Ember's Descent, a war bow submitted by Cosmic. So join us on Monday for that. Otherwise, Kage will be back next Friday in the studio, where we will continue D&D discussions with another topic that we will go into a deep dive with. Otherwise, we just want to thank you guys again for being here, for participating in chat. Hope to see you guys again. Otherwise, that's going to be no other updates. Otherwise, if you guys do like what you guys saw here today, if you guys missed anything earlier, and if you want to catch anything else that we've done, you can check all of our VODs on our YouTube channel. So let me drop the link in chat for you as well. And if you guys want to chat with us off stream, if you guys want to submit topics for us to talk about on Fridays, or if you want to submit your own homebrew review for us to review on Mondays, you can do that in our Discord. So that link is also in the chat. If you guys want to join, come on over. It would be great to have you. And we could just chat offline, because we do this every Monday and Friday. And then otherwise, we're just chilling out online on Discord. So thank you guys again. It's been fantastic. It was a lot of fun. So sorry for the technical difficulties and the echo. Hopefully we can figure out what happened there and get that fixed. But otherwise, I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you have a fantastic weekend ahead of you, but that's going to be us. Cheers, y'all. And I know, as Kage would always like to say, shalom, friends. Take care.